IB Nation, what's going on? Welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Ryan Roberts, Director of Recruiting here at Irish Breakdown, joined by the founder, the publisher, Mr. Brian Driscoll, coming to you all live on a Tuesday. And I know we're all super excited. We're ready to really get into the midst of the spring because it's going to be a very important spring for Notre Dame football. There's no doubt about it. And we're going to focus heavily on spring practice and what we're expecting out of the defense, kind of looking forward to the spring because we're only 8 days away from Notre Dame spring ball officially kicking off on the 22nd of this month. So I know we're both pumped. Brian, I know it's a huge year. We talk about the second year under Al Golden as a defensive coordinator. A lot of questions to be answered, a lot of talent to go through today. But in general, man, this is going to be an extremely important defensive spring for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
No, it really is, Ryan. And when you look at this football team, there's this perception that the defense sucked last year. And it didn't. The defense was still good. It was still a top 40 scoring defense. It was a top 30 defense in regard to total yards. You know, its rush defense was inconsistent, but on line with most Notre Dame defenses in recent years. It wasn't abnormally bad. Its pass defense was pretty good compared to past Notre Dame seasons. And it just was overall, it was a team that did some really good things. It was one of the best total yard defenses that Notre Dame has had in a while. Now, yards per play, a little bit of a different story, but even there, Ryan, they were 34th in yards per play. The problem is they were terrible at certain things. They were terrible at forcing turnovers for most of the year. They were terrible in the red zone for most of the year. And so there were issues like that you look at and say, there was drops in certain areas. They weren't good enough at certain positions to be a championship defense. And that's really what this conversation comes down to. The defense was better than the offense was last year for most of the season. I mean, that's not really debatable, not in every game, but for most of the season. And it wasn't clutch. It wasn't a defense that could make plays when it really needed to. And that's something that I felt like Marcus Freeman and Clark Lee and Mike Elko's defenses did, is even when they were having bad games, for the most part, they could get stops when they needed to get stops. The defense last year against Ohio State couldn't do that in the fourth quarter, couldn't do it against Marshall in the fourth quarter, couldn't do it against Stanford in the fourth quarter, couldn't do it against USC in the second half. And so that played with an offense that underachieved to result in Notre Dame underachieving as a team. So now the question is, okay, can you take it to another level this year? Can you improve it, or is it going to just be sort of a little bit better version of what we saw last year? Because I fully anticipate, and we'll explain why in part of this article, Ron, I anticipate this defense being slightly better just because of experience and things like that we'll dive into. But experience and slightly better doesn't make you a playoff caliber football team, not against the schedule they're going to face this year. It's about, can you jump it back into where it was before and then maybe take it to another level? That's going to be the question. Well, and if they can't do that, then this team is going to just continue to be good, but not great. And that's really, and it's got to start this spring, right?
Well, and I think one key thing that you hit on, and I agree 100% on it, is usually even the elite defenses in college football and even kind of working up to the NFL level, they're usually elite in a couple different spots, but they're at least solid in everything, right? They're solid here, they're solid there, they're good there, they're elite here, they're elite there. There's not usually those championship level defenses or even, elite defenses or even really great defenses that are great in a few different spots and then bad in another, right? Like that was Notre Dame last year. We'll talk about red zone defense, for instance, right? Like Notre Dame was bad last year. It wasn't okay, or it wasn't solid. It wasn't even below average. Like it was bad. Like it was what was statistically the worst in college football, I think, last year, right? Like it was awful. So
second worst in overall red zone defense, dead last in red zone touchdown defense. Now,
exactly
where they were good, Ryan, is here's the deal. They didn't allow many teams to get into the red zone, right? I mean, and that's sort of the thing about this defense that makes you so frustrated. They ranked 10th. They were tied for 10th in the nation. And two of the teams, let me finish that sentence. They were tied for 10th in the nation in fewest red zone trips allowed. Now, two of the teams they were tied with were Michigan and Georgia. Now, keep in mind that those two teams played one and then two extra games. So Michigan played one extra game, Georgia two. But it gets you in that sort of that conversation of they didn't allow many teams to get into the red zone. So if you simply improve that one area and you jump into the top 50, all of a sudden you're a much better defense. But is it still good enough to win those big games? That's a different conversation and a different question, right? And that's where they need to get to. And there's a lot of strengths to build on. There's no question. But there's also a lot more question marks on this side of the ball than there is on offense. And I think that's partly where the excitement on offense comes from and where the concerns are on defense. Whereas on defense, it's kind of like, well, a lot of guys come back, but even though there's a ton of guys coming back, we'll break down what I mean by that. It's still a situation where you're like, but who's the dudes?
Right.
Who are the guys that are the stars outside of the two corners? Who's going to really be good up front? Whereas on offense, you say, man, they underachieved last year, but boy, there's some talent there. There's some stuff to build around. And so on defense, it's more of, well, they got these two dudes, but there's no Blake Fisher, Joe Walt combination up front. There's,
Right.
You've got the corners, there's no Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, exciting 1-2 that we're hyping up and excited about it. Linebacker like there is at running back, and those are the things you look at. And then the transfers aren't as sexy as Sam Hartman, in my opinion, from a perception standpoint. Now, you and I are going to have a lot to say about those guys as we kind of go over the next few months about how they're going to be very important parts of this defense. But I think that's where the perception of this defense comes from, why there's not a lot of excitement, even though it was a solid group last year.
Right.
But the reality is, Ryan, if those things are going to change, some of the answers we're going to start to find this spring.
Yeah.
And as we said with the offense, if you're going, and you nailed it, Ryan, if you're going to be a big-time defense, there's got to be things you can hang your hat on. It's got to be things you say, boy, this is where they're really, really good. And from start to finish last year, there was nothing that Notre Dame can hang their hat on and say, we know we're at least good there, opener to final, like for 95% of the season. Because no matter what your strength is, Ryan, everybody has a bad game. Yeah. Everybody does, right? And so it's not about necessarily being elite every single game. It's about, okay, are you doing it over the course of the entire season? That's the question mark, right? And so that's where I think I want to see kind of Notre Dame get to. And so you look at Georgia, right? Their defense the last 2 years has been pretty outstanding. Their 2021 defense has just really been phenomenal. But guess what? They had a really bad game in the SEC title game. It happens, right? So the thing is, can you be strong somewhere? And I think when you look at this football team, that's one difference, in my opinion, Ryan, that's different now than where we were when we were talking about where this defense was in the fall, is there's at least one area that I go into the opener against Navy saying Notre Dame is going to be really good there, and that's cornerback. That is the number one strength. And as we'll get into this conversation, it's so strong that I believe that this coaching staff needs to use that strength to then help other positions, which we'll get another position we'll get into, Ryan. But that is one positive going into this offseason and going into the spring, is there's at least one position that I feel good about saying going into right now, March 14th, as soon as Cam Hart gets fully healthy, that's going to be a major strength for Notre Dame, is cornerback. And that's where the strengths of this defense begin.
It's pretty wild to think about, because when you talk about Benjamin Morrison in the year he had as a freshman, obviously he's coming back next year, right? You can't leave for the NFL until after 3 years of college experience. So he's coming back as a sophomore. And honestly, Brian, if Cam Hart did not come back, I would still be looking at that cornerback group being like, they have a chance to be really good. Like they still have a chance to be very good. But the fact of the matter is that, and it's an unfortunate circumstance for Cam Hart that he had the injury towards the end of the year, but he has an opportunity now to come back and end his career off on the right notes.
It was unfortunate for him in 2022. Yes. I think it's going to be fortunate for him and the entire defense in 2023, because now he gets a chance to be a more consistent player. Because last year, Ryan, with Cam Hart, for example, I think Cam has gone from has become a guy that is very underrated and underappreciated by Notre Dame fans because he had a couple bad moments last year. I wouldn't even say he had bad games. He had a bad first half against Ohio State.
Yeah.
How many balls did Ohio State hit on him in the second half? And it wasn't for lack of effort, right? Yeah. He had a couple bad plays against North Carolina. You know what he did in between those bad plays? A lot of really good stuff. That's the nature of cornerback play. if you give up a couple plays, there's this assumption that, well, this guy just gives up a lot of plays. Second half of the year, there's a lot of good film for NFL teams to look at second half of the year. However, it's just not been consistent. Well, now that he comes back, he has a chance to prove that he can be a more consistent player. And he's going into year 3 as a starter, which I think is going to be huge for him because, again, this is a kid that made a position switch and not going from corner to safety like Ramon Henderson. He went from wide receiver to corner, a little bit different. And so, to me, I think that's huge. But now there's this guy across from him that kind of elevated his game. And when I talked to a source when we found out before it was announced that Cam Hart was going to come back, the source I spoke with said, the fact that Benjamin Morrison played so well was motivation for Cam to come back because he wants to get thrown at more. He doesn't like that he gets – that's the kind of an attitude you want, Ryan. Like, come at me. Bring it. And so if he can build on what he was the last 6 games, I mean, I've said that, like, Zay Flowers, big-time NFL prospect, right? People talk about Marvin Harrison is arguably the best receiver in college football next year. And I don't even think it's that arguable, to be completely honest with you, in my opinion. I don't know if there's anyone I would put in his league next year, in my view. You talk about some of the Jordan Addison. Well, actually, that doesn't matter because Cam Hart didn't play against him. But you kind of go through the schedule and you look at the different guys, the BYU receivers, right? Josh Downs from North Carolina, the receivers in North Carolina had. Outside of a couple plays, those guys didn't make a lot of plays on Notre Dame. Zay Flowers did almost nothing against Notre Dame. And again, it wasn't for lack of effort. They tried to get him the ball. The kid that, we Notre Dame fans saw Emmett Morehead struggle and stink, but what a lot of them didn't see, Ryan, that we saw was a week before against a really good NC State defense. He passed for over 300 yards and led BC to a road win against that BC.
I think he's going to be a good football player, man. Emmett Morehead had a couple nice performances, man. I think he's going to be.
But Notre Dame fans saw him get overwhelmed. Well, that had a lot to do with the fact that at that time, Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison had really hit their stride together, and they took Zay Flowers out of the game. He had that one long play where he beat. Who did he beat on that? It wasn't.
It was near the sideline, right? Down the sideline.
Tariq Bracy.
Could have been.
He might have beat Tariq on that play.
Yeah.
And then they tried to go at him again the next play, and Benjamin Morrison picks it off, right? And they tried to throw those perimeter screens, and Zay catches it and makes people miss. And what did Cam Hart do all game? Sorry, bro. Not happening against me. So we've seen it against some of the best, and that's what has me excited. And then you talk about it. Jaden Mickey's got a lot of potential. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do next year. I hear great things about Chance Tucker from people inside the program. They're like, in other years, Chance Tucker's playing a ton for us. It's just we're loaded there. You obviously Clarence Lewis comes back this spring, and then you look at Christian Gray. I wrote this in an article today. 2-3 years ago, you're wondering if Christian Gray is going to start. He's got to pass up at least 3 guys just to become the number 3 corner.
I mean, if Christian Gray got dropped in before the 2020 season for Notre Dame, he's starting no brainer, right? I mean, on the other side of Nick McLeod, like he's starting from day one. Like there's no doubt, to your point.
Right.
And I think that you get, Brian, now you're to this point now where this is an admiralty for Notre Dame, in my opinion, to have 2 long outside corners that can play man all game if you want them to. Like Notre Dame's had good corner duos. I mean, we talk a lot about, the Troy Pride, Julian Love duo.
That was a really good duo.
But it wasn't a duo though that could play straight man to man every snap if they wanted to.
Only Troy Pride could do that. Right? Yeah.
And you could do that with those 2 cats. And it's gotten to such an embarrassment of riches. You mentioned, Christian Gray just trying to hit, get into the lineup. Chance Tucker got into the lineup. You might have a situation where you are so loaded at corner that you could say, Clarence, like, go to the safety now, man. Like, we need you to help the team out there, right? Yeah. So, I mean, it is such an advantage defensively. Think of it from a defensive coach's perspective. If I have 2 outside corners that can play man-to-man all game, I can do so many different things up front. I can give so many different looks, a lot of movement. I can throw in some pressure packages. I can take a little bit of chances defensively with that type of group outside because for the most part, they're going to give up a play here and there, but for the most part, man-to-man outside, you're going to be in good shape, man. You're going to be in really good shape.
Yeah. I think that's good, and they're going to need it when you look at the schedule this year. They're playing a lot of good passing teams again this year, so it's a great place to start. I didn't even mention Ryan Barnes. That's another guy. Micah Bell shows up in the fall. So you're talking about Notre Dame being long and out. I mean, your shortest guy as far as height and length is Jaden Mickey. Your second shortest guy is Benjamin Morrison, like length and height.
At
Chance
6 foot,
Tucker's,
yeah.
yes, at 6 foot with long arms. Chance Tucker's like about 6 foot with very long arms. I could be wrong, but I would argue he's a little longer than Benjamin Morrison. I could be wrong, but it's close. Brian Barnes certainly is.
Yeah.
Cam Hart certainly is. Christian Gray certainly is. So that's what kind of gets you fired up a little bit about this, Ryan, is there's just a lot to build around. And so when you can go into a spring and say, hey, we have a chance at this position to be as good as anybody in the country, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Point number 2, strength number 2. This can be perceived in a lot of different ways. And I'm sure when you read the article, you were like, well, this is going to be interesting how the chat's going to respond to this. But I do think coaching continuity, if they would have made a change at defensive coordinator, for example, and they'd have brought in somebody proven, I'd have been like, great. But that didn't happen. They're bringing Al Golden back. They're bringing Al Washington back. They're bringing Chris O'Leary back. And obviously Mike Mickens comes back. To me, there's a lot of coaching continuity coming back. Now, there was a graduate assistant change at linebacker, and that's, okay, that's fine. But I'm sorry, there's no excuse not to have good coaching at linebacker. The point is, there are some positives to the coaching continuity, and I think that's a strength for this team. In that, if Al Golden doesn't change a thing, Ryan, and he needs to change things, definitely needs to change things. But if for some reason he's one of the typical stubborn, know-it-all coach that just keeps doing what he's doing, and I'm not saying that him specifically insult him. I'm lumping him into the category of the typical hard-headed, stubborn coach. So I'm not saying he's that way, but I'm saying if he's that way and he doesn't change a thing, this defense should still be better simply because they now know what he expects of them. They now know how he coaches. They now know how he game plans. They now know what the expectations are. They now know the defense better. So unless he just goes out and puts a whole brand new defense in, that continuity is going to matter. The defensive linemen now know, okay, this is what Coach Washington wants from me. This is how, and I think because a lot of the veterans are gone, you're not going to hear as much of that. Well, this is what Elston did. I don't care. I got great respect for Mike Elston, but he's not at Notre Dame anymore. So I don't care what he did. It's about buying into what this coach is doing. I expect there to be more buy-in from the guys this year. They have to be. So I do think in that regard, that's a potential strength that you could say should help this defense get better is the players know the coaches better. The coaches know the players better. I think that should be helpful.
I mean, because I think you have to remove your frustration for a second, right? If you're just a Notre Dame fan for a split second, because yes, you want things to improve. You want things to be a little bit different. You want things to function differently. And we'll talk about that during the show later on in the show. But I mean, for me, Brian, you can't argue that there's not going to be a maturation from some players in year 2 of a system. Like, you can't argue that. Guys are going to understand it more. I mean, that's just a basic thing, right? It's like if I read a book one time through and I'm confused when I read it, if I go back and read a second time, I'm going to retain more information. Like, that's just kind of how natural learning happens, right? So whether you like what the defense is doing schematically, whether you like the development that they're kind of utilizing at different spots from a talent perspective, it's inarguable, in my opinion, that you can't say that some players, specifically making that jump from year 1 to year 2, aren't going to understand things better. Like, that's going to happen. Like, you can't, I don't think you could argue against that piece, right? So there's going to be more comfort as you become more understanding in what your expectations are and what's happening around you. You're going to naturally get more confident. And as you get more confident, what do players do? They play faster. They move faster. They process quicker. Those things come to fruition. So, yes, I think that the defense is going to be better in 2023 than 2022 because you did retain a lot of the same players.
Right.
And you are now in a second year of understanding what the expectations are. So if it didn't really sink in year 1, there's a better opportunity for a lot of the players that it does sink in year 2. So there's going to be a natural maturation, in my opinion.
Now, will it be enough for this team to make a big jump on defense? That remains to be seen. We'll get to it. Key number 3, and this is an interesting one, Ryan. It's experience. And there, I think there's a misguided notion that there's a lot of inexperience on defense for Notre Dame this year, and I completely disagree with that. Here's where I'm coming from. 6 of their top 10, their top 4. This is according to Pro Football Focus. The top 4 players in snaps from last year all come back, and 6 of their top 10 come back from last season.
Wow.
Notre Dame returns a total of 13 players that played at least 200 snaps last season, and 3 more, the 3 includes Gabriel Rubio, that played at least 180 snaps in their careers, right? So, and then you add Thomas Harper, who has over 1,000 career snaps, over 900 career snaps, and then Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who has over 1,000 career snaps, and you're talking about a team that has 10 players coming back, 10 players return with at least 800 career snaps, and you have 4 more with at least 400 career snaps. That's a lot of experience. Now, we get into questions of, okay, who's the experienced dynamic guy? Who's the experienced pass rusher as far as the guy that's proven? There's a lot of questions about proven production. That's fair. We'll get into that in the concerns area. But there's no doubt, in my opinion, that there is a lot of experience coming back. There's a lot of talent coming back. And so I think that's something to build on along with that coaching continuity. And the reason that matters, Ryan, is because if you have coaches coming back that were here last year, but a bunch of new players, then the continuity isn't as great. When you talk about that continuity and you're talking about bringing back 13 guys that played at least 200 snaps in this defense, that's why that coaching continuity and experience kind of go hand in hand and why I had them back to back.
Well, and I think that an experience level returning for a team, that brings a baseline, right? Like that brings a floor. Like there's an expectation because you literally have seen it on film. Now people will question, and you hit on it a little bit, is that, okay, we know what the floor is, right? It will most likely be at least as good as last year because, guys usually don't get worse. They usually kind of stay the same or they kind of level off. Usually that's kind of how trajectories work. So I think there's a baseline and there's a floor to how good this defense will be. But the question is for me is to your point, what's the ceiling though, right? Just because you're bringing back proven production doesn't mean you're bringing back dudes of proven production, right? Doesn't mean that you're bringing back playmakers. Doesn't mean that you're bringing back high-level producers. Notre Dame has lost a couple high-level producers from their team in 2022, obviously. So there's going to be a question mark on experience, but I think, again, we're getting back to the same kind of conversation piece of with so much experience coming back, there's going to be a floor there, right? There's going to be like kind of an expectations as far as it'll at least be this good. But will it be this good? That's I think there's a little bit of there's uncertainty and there's a little bit of a crevice between this is the expectation, this is the floor that you were building off of in 2022, but can it get here? Because you need it to take a big jump, not just a little jump. Like Notre Dame needs to take a substantial jump defensively, and that's the question mark. Experience is not a bad thing ever, but if you don't bring back any legitimate playmakers in that experience, that's where you level off.
We'll get into that more when we get into the question marks about the defense. And it's going to be the same thing with point 4. The defensive line is the wide receiver group for the defense. And what that means is when we talked about the receiver group, we talked about them in the strengths and we talked about them in the concerns. The concerns was lack of experience, lack of proven production. Who's the guy? The strength, however, was just looking at raw talent. And to me, I think there's the area where there's the biggest misconception amongst Notre Dame fans about this returning team is the talent of the defensive line. And there's this big fear of, well, I don't know if we're good enough up front. If Notre Dame is not good enough up front next year, it won't be because of a lack of talent. It'll be because the talent wasn't developed properly. This is one of the deepest and to me, most talented football teams Notre Dame is going to have up front in a long time. Now, is there a proven guy like a Khalid Kareem, a Isaiah Foskey, a Jason Adamiola? No, there's not that proven guy. No question. Not going to argue that. And that's why it's still a concern. But just looking at talent, like just raw athletic talent, perfect example is the Viper position. You lose Isaiah Foskey. He'll probably be a day 1, day 2 draft pick, right? Notre Dame's all-time leader in sacks.
Yep.
You got to replace him. That's one of the things I'm least concerned about this season when I look at this Notre Dame football team. And it's not just about, oh, well, Jordan Pateljo's there. If it was just Jordan Patel, I'd say, yeah, but Jordan Patel hasn't proven anything over a period of time. He's had flashes here and there where it's looked really good. And you say, if he can be that guy consistently, he could be a double-digit sack guy next year. No doubt. But you can't have that if it's got to be this guy or you're screwed mentality. It's him. It's Josh Burnham, who I wrote in the article and would argue, Ryan, is pound for pound the best athlete that Notre Dame has on defense. I was told he had a 37-inch vertical jump when Notre Dame did their testing. What was Isaiah Foskey's broad? Yes, exactly. What was Isaiah Foskey's broad jump?
He was 10.5 in the broad and 34 inches in the vert.
I was told that Josh Burnham at Notre Dame's kind of testing period recently had a 37-inch vertical and a 10.5 broad as a basically going into second year in college. Isaiah Foskey did that at the combine after being a 4-year player and spending the previous 2 months preparing to do the best he could in that.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you're talking about a kid who's 6'4". He's over 6'4" now. He's grown. He's about 6'4", a little over 6'4" now. I've been told he's up to 245 pounds. He's got exceptional wingspan, just like Foskey. And he's probably not even going to start for you this year, at least as of right now. You've got Junior Tuihalamaka. You've got Aiden Gobira. Again, I'm not worried about that position, right? Big end, how good will it be? I don't know. But between Javonte Jean-Baptiste, between Nana Osafa-Mensah, between Alexander Ahrensberger, and then the incoming freshman, again, if you can't get good play from your big end position, that's a coaching problem, not a player problem, in my opinion. And we'll get into a little bit of the question marks about the interior. But again, you don't lack talent. You lack experience at that position. That's one where, but Riley Mills moves inside, right, where he played very well in the bowl game, in my opinion. You've got Howard Cross coming back, who's a very experienced player. You've got Gabriel Rubio, who got a ton of snaps last year. Aiden Keanaaina comes back from an injury last year. Jason Onye's now a junior. So there's talent, and Devin Houston's an early enrollee. So again, you look at it, Ryan, and say, I don't know if this group's going to be good or not, which we'll get into. But there's talent there. There's a lot of teams in college football that would love to have Notre Dame's problem at defensive tackle. And for those listening via podcast, I just did air quotes around problem. Because, again, it is a question mark, just like every team has question marks. But it's not like you're hoping that this mediocre talent here can pan out. You're hoping if a really talented, raw kid like Tyson Ford can pan out. You're hoping if a really raw, talented kid like Jason Onye can pan out. That's what you're hoping for. You're not hoping for, man, I really hope Pat Kuntz can step up and help us this year, with all due respect to Pat Kuntz. Or, gee, I really hope Tony Springman can step up and really be a good role player for us. Nice kid, hard worker, tough kid, key rotation player in that 2012 team, but not a potential difference maker. You're hoping that potential difference makers can start to tap into that potential this season. That's what you're hoping for. And so, again, talent and depth on the D-line is not a question mark. There's a lot of talent to work with. It's now up to Al Washington to say, hey, go get these boys ready to play. It's now up to Al Golden to say, hey, put this D-line in position to attack. They're not a real big D-line, so don't ask them to play like one. Turn them loose.
Yep.
Those are the things that I want to see. And if the defensive line's not productive, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to probably lean more towards they weren't coached right than I am, gee, maybe the talent wasn't as good as I thought it was. I'm just going to be honest about that right now.
Well, and I remember we going into last season, Brian, I mean, like I just had this assumption in my mind that this was going to be a very attack style front for Notre Dame. You know, they don't have a ton of size on the interior that's proven going into last season, right? I mean, your best returning interior defensive lineman was Jason Adamalola at 280 pounds, and then it was Howard Cross at 265, 270 pounds. Like you expect, let's be attack style, let's create penetration, and let's make plays in the backfield. Like that's kind of how you need to win, right? Creating chaos. And for whatever reason, that didn't come to fruition in 2022. 2023, it's a little bit of the same, man. Notre Dame's actually going to upgrade from a size perspective, though. You know, losing Jason Adamalola is a blow for sure. But, I mean, moving Riley Mills back inside, you're going to have a 6'5" kid that's going to be right around 300 pounds playing inside now next to, you know, you mentioned Howard Cross, who's still an undersized guy, but you're going to have Jason Onye. You're going to have Gabriel Rubio. You're going to have a lot more beef in 2023 than what you had in 2022. But I really talk about the Viper position all the time because I think you hit on a few key things there, is that Isaiah Foskey by himself had 11 sacks last year, right? At 26 and a half in his career. substantial playmaker from that Viper position. But one thing I think that people underestimate sometimes about production is that you don't need one player in 2023 to have 11 sacks. You need that Viper position, though, to supplement that production somehow, right? Like you need Jordan Botelho, you need Joshua Burnham, you need maybe Aiden Gobira, maybe Junior Toilamaka, like whoever ends up being like the key rotation players at Viper. You do need those guys to play well on a snap-to-snap basis. But the key there is, for me, is that Isaiah Foskey was playing a large portion of the snaps, right? Because he's a senior, he's a future top 64 NFL draft pick. Like he's that type of dude, right? But now in 2023, you don't need Joshua Burnham to be as impactful as Isaiah Foskey on 60 snaps a game. You need him to play 20 snaps and be dang good at it, man. You need him to play 30 snaps. You need Jordan Botelho to play 30 snaps and be dang good. It's a lot easier to be productive on a shorter amount of snaps. You're going to be able to keep guys fresh, I think, more this year because there's going to be a deeper rotation on the defensive line. So, yes, there might not be one single guy that is quite as productive or impactful as Isaiah Foskey, but you might have more guys that are consistent contributors to your defense, which I think is paramount and it's important.
And that's what I was saying earlier, right? Like maybe Jordan Patel can be that guy where he breaks out and has a double-digit sack year. It wouldn't shock me if he did that, but I'm not asking him to do that. That's the thing. I don't need him to do that. I don't need him to replace that production. I would say that the production law that you have to figure out or answer for is 15 and a half sacks because you had the 11 from Foskey and then the 4.5 from Jordan Patel. I don't really count the 3 that Justin Adamiola had because all his sacks came in sort of the nickel package where he was on the field with Isaiah Foskey in most of those instances. So when I look at it that way, Ryan, I say it's 15 and a half. But your point is the same. If those 4 guys all average just 4 sacks each, that's it. You've got 16. And then it's about and see, here's the other thing too, Ryan, to your point is Isaiah Foskey last year struggled against Stanford and Ohio State probably as much as any game he struggled in. What is the one thing that those two teams have in common? The one thing that those two offenses have in common. There's only one thing because one is really good and one's not very good, right? Well, I say 2 things. Both had NFL quarterbacks on their roster, although different level NFL quarterbacks, but they both had NFL quarterbacks.
Sure.
But the one thing they had in common also was they had very long tackles.
Yep.
And if Isaiah Foskey couldn't win against that, then you were in trouble. What I like about this group is you have different body types that bring different skill sets. So, hey, they're eating Jordan up. This matchup's just not good for Jordan. They're really long, and he's just not real long, and they're eating him up. Then put Burnham in there. Put Gobira in there. Let Junior get up underneath his pads or do whatever. Or, boy, this guy is really athletic, and this guy's really big and lumbering, and Jordan's just getting under his pads and blowing up, and you like that matchup. And Junior maybe is a little bit better matchup this week. They've got a guy that's a great technician, but he's not real powerful. So he's eating Josh Burnham up because Josh isn't there yet with the advanced technique. Well, then let Jordan go in there who's got a little bit more advanced technique. Let Junior Tuilamaka get in there who's really strong and just blow him up. And so you've got all these different skill sets too, and you can say that at every position. Javonte Jean-Baptiste brings a different skill set to the table than Nana Osafa-Mensah does, who has a different skill set than Alexander Ahrensberger. They all 3 need to play, in my opinion. Right? At nose tackle, you've got Howard Cross can do what he can do. Completely different player than Gabriel Rubio, Aiden Keanaaina. And so that's a thing for me that I see a little bit more of this year, Ryan, is a different type of skill set where Justin Adamiola's game wasn't a whole lot different than Isaiah Foskey's game. They really weren't a whole lot. He was a little bit more technically proficient, but like the way he liked to attack, the long arm, the power move, it was very similar in style, whereas Jordan Patel and Javonte Jean-Baptiste are going to look a lot different.
Yeah.
And Josh Burnham and Nana Osafa-Mensah are going to look a lot different. And so to me, that's where I look at it. Whereas like Nana wasn't a whole lot different than Isaiah Foskey. Riley Mills didn't play with a whole lot different than Isaiah Foskey did. They used the long arm and power moves. So it didn't matter who was really playing end last year. You were getting pretty much the same type of player. The thing I like about this group is that there's a potential for a lot of different variety of a pass rush. And, again, we'll talk a little bit more about the concerns there when we get into the issues where this defense has got to get better. But again, Ryan, there's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of formerly highly ranked recruits. For those people who are stargazers, there's a lot of 4-star kids that are in this rotation fighting for rotation spot for Notre Dame. And now it's about developing them. That's going to be the key.
Well, and I think that, again, another great point there, just kind of work off of it again, is that if I'm an offensive lineman and going against a defensive lineman, if a guy's throwing the same move at me all day, I don't have to think, right? You don't have to think. You don't have to prepare. You don't have to second guess yourself. Well, you don't have to prepare, but you don't have to second guess yourself in the midst of a vertical set, in the midst of a 45. Because I know, all due respect to Isaiah Foskey, I know what Isaiah Foskey is going to do as a pass rush plan. I know what he's going to do. Like you said, he's going to stick his foot in the ground. He's going to barrel down your chest. He's going to hit the long arm. That's what Isaiah Foskey is going to do. Jordan Botelho is not going to work that way. He's going to have different things in his arsenal because he's a different type of rusher.
Can I interrupt you real quick, Ryan? Because I want to add to your point. That's also what Riley Mills did.
Yes.
It's also what Justin Adamiola did. It's also what Nana does as a pass rusher. So that was my point. Right now, continue with what you're saying.
Yeah, and as if Paris Johnson Jr. and DeJuan Jones aren't talented enough of players, right? If they only have to prepare for one thing, and especially, the DeJuan Jones thing especially, because it's a person that Isaiah Foskey gets linked to a lot because he didn't have a good game against DeJuan Jones. He didn't have a good Senior Bowl performance against DeJuan Jones on day one because DeJuan Jones is 375 pounds, man. Why am I just barreling down his chest? It's not going to work, Isaiah. It's not going to work, man. All due respect again. But now you're going into a matchup where whoever the best offensive tackles are on the board, there's going to be guys that can burrow down your chest and use power and convert speed to power. But then there's going to be Joshua Burnham, who's probably going to attack the outside shoulder a lot more, right? He's going to use his speed and athleticism. Jordan Botelho is going to be like an Energizer bunny of a rusher where you just have no idea what the heck he's going to do at times. You're going to have Javonte Jean-Baptiste that has a little bit of everything, he's not a perfect outside track guy, but he has a little bit of nuance in that regard. You just have so many different kind of skill sets marrying together, even inside, man. There's going to be one play, Brian, where you're going against a center is going to be going against Howard Cross at 265 pounds. And the next play, you're going to go against 300-pound Gabriel Rubio. It's just like that is a tough matchup to be able to counteract that type of movement inside. It's not like I'm just throwing 300-pounder after 300-pounder. They're the same type of player. Having to deal with the 270-pound gap slipper and then having to deal with Gabriel Rubio, who's more of a traditional nose tackle in your system, that's difficult, man. And I always talk about this every single week, and I just want to keep harping on this, man. If I'm a head coach, if I'm an offense coordinator, or if I'm a defensive coordinator for a team, I'm trying to make the opposition uncomfortable. Make them uncomfortable. How do I make them uncomfortable? I have to make them think, man. Make them think. Make them get out of their comfort zone. If you do, then that's how you really take advantage of what teams are throwing at you, man. That's how you dictate the pace of a football game. You dictate the momentum of a football game. Make them think. Make them second guess their preparation. Make them confused. You do those types of things, Notre Dame has a chance to be very good. But, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to if we think that they'll be put in position to do so. But I think Notre Dame has the makeup to be that impactful up front if they use their talent correctly.
So let's go to point number 5, Ryan, and this is going to be kind of building on to that. Notre Dame the last 2 years added a lot of young athletes to the defensive depth chart, a lot. And my whole thing is I'm so over the youth excuse, so over it. Georgia had, 3 true freshmen starting last year in the playoffs, right, if I remember correctly? 2 or 3 others playing a lot of football. Several redshirt freshmen playing last year.
Their most impactful defensive lineman in the national championship game was Bear Alexander, who was a true freshman. The most productive one, anyway.
Their best safety last year was a true freshman.
Yes.
Malachi Starks. I'm so over the whole, they're young. They need to develop. This is college football. This is the open transfer portal. If you're not coaching in a way that allows younger players to get on the field early, then you're just not coaching right. You have not adapted to what this is. And when I look at this depth chart and I see a linebacking core that has guys like Nolan Ziegler, Jalen Sneed, Jaden Alsbury, Drake Bowen, if you can't get a good linebacker rotation this year, that's a coaching problem 1,000%. You look at the defensive line, and again, we just talked a lot about it, need to rehash it a ton. There's a lot of Tyson Ford is a guy that If Al Golden can't work with that kid, or Al Washington can't work with that kid, perhaps that's an Al Washington problem. Okay. Oh, well, Tyson's got to learn to do. Okay. But it's your job to teach him how to do those things and to push him and do those type of things, right? This is a kid that a year ago we were all super fired up about Marcus Washington coming in and beating Oklahoma and teams like that for him. And he was a top 100 kid. Aiden Gobira, top 100 kid. You're bringing in a very raw freshman class, but a very toolsy freshman class. You can't get one of those guys ready to play. That's a coaching problem. Between Snead, Ziegler, Bowen, and Osbury, I'd even throw Preston Zinter into this conversation. If you can't get those guys ready to play, that's a you problem. I'm sorry. I'm so sick of the excuses. Well, it's this, it's that. I'm sorry. No, that's a you. Mike Mickens was able to take a freshman who didn't play a freaking snap in the spring because he was still in high school and turned him into an All-American. Okay? I'm tired of this. I'm tired of the whole, oh, they're too young. They need time to cook, right? No, this isn't 1995. You've got to have a system in place that gets these young players to play. And when you look at the athleticism and the length that Notre Dame has in their freshman and sophomore classes, there's no excuse not to be good. Now, am I saying the entire front seven needs to be freshmen and sophomores? No, that's stupid. I'm not saying that. There's plenty of veterans. But what I'm saying is you don't have to put up with Marist making the mistakes he made this year. And if you do, that's a you problem, not a Marist problem. Marist is who he is. So it's your job to find a niche where Marist can use his skills to thrive. That's your job as a coach. It's your job as a coach to say, Jalen Snead's really good here, 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 and here, not good here and here. So let me find a role where I can put him here to thrive. One of the best things that Clark Lee ever said to me, when I was at the previous place, we had this football preview, and we worked on it, and we would sit down with the coordinators and do one-on-one interviews. And I was only supposed to have 30 minutes. But I sat down with Clark Lee. It was late in the day. The SID came in to say 30 minutes is up, and Coach Lee was like, hey, just give us a couple. And then he left. So we sat down there for like 2 hours talking ball. And one of the things that Clark Lee said, and this is one of the things I always respected about Clark Lee, he said, I'm sitting in the meeting with the coaches, and they're telling me what, like, this kid can't do that. And he said, hold on a second. He said, everybody stop. He goes, I don't want to hear another word about what these kids can't do. Tell me what they can do, and we'll build around that. And I feel like with Al Golden being an NFL guy, he spends way too much time focusing on what kids can't do and not nearly enough time on what they can do. So if Jalen Snead can only do 3 things at a high level, then you put him on the field and let him do those 3 things at a high level. If you're going to tell me Nolan Ziegler can't get on the field because he doesn't have enough weight here, then you're not a good football coach. I'm sorry. You're just not. If you can't figure a way to get those guys onto the field. And same thing up front. If you got all these talented young players and none of them are ready to play, if I'm Marcus Freeman, then you need to fire those coaches for one of 2 reasons. Either A, they're terrible at identifying players because all these kids they brought in aren't ready to play, or B, they're not very good at developing players. And so it's a huge year for the front 7 coaches to develop these guys, because anyone that's going to try to use the talent excuse or the recruiting excuse this year, I'm not going to have it.
Yeah.
Are they young? Yes. Is that problematic to some degree? Yes. I don't want a front 7 depth chart that's nothing but freshmen and sophomores. That's not good. I don't have enough grown man strength in there, but that's not an issue. Patelho's a senior. Riley Mills is a senior. Cross is a 5th-year guy. Rubio's a junior. Javante Jean-Baptiste is going to be a 6th-year senior. Nana's going to be a senior. Aaronsberger's going to be a senior. You got plenty of grown-ups in the room. Maris is a 5th-year guy. JD's a 5th-year guy. Jack Kaiser's a 5th-year guy. You got plenty of grown-ups. And I'm not saying get rid of Jack Kaiser. He sucks. No, I think Jack does some really good things. But again, you don't need to put Jack in the situations where he's not good, because you've got Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Snead. Where's Jack get exposed, Ryan? When you put him in space against bigger guys or faster guys. So don't do that to him. Yeah. Let Nolan have that matchup. Let Jalen have that matchup. Let your nickel have that matchup. Let Jack be closer to the box. Let Jack attack the ball, because you know what Jack Kaiser does really well? Freaking run to the football. That's what Jack does really well. You know what he doesn't do well? Open up and run. So guess what? Stop asking him to do that, because you have guys that can do that. And so that's my whole point, Ryan, is there's no excuse this year. No excuse for talent. Last year, you say, well, they were all freshmen. Okay, whatever. It's still a BS excuse.
Sure.
But now those guys are sophomores now. And you got another freshman class coming in. And so to me, I'm like, you can use Maris now for what he does well. You can use Jack now to do what he does well. And then in areas where he doesn't do well, let those other kids play. Because Jack Kaiser is too good attacking the football to be like what some fans are. Just, oh, forget Jack Kaiser. Just don't play him. That's nonsense. Well, he doesn't do this well. I get that. Don't disagree. But you know who does that well? Freaking Nolan Ziegler, Jalen Snead, Jane Osbury. Let them do that. Let the nickel do that. And then put Jack in here and let Jack do what he does really well. And that's where I hope that Al Golden adopts sort of that Clark Lee mentality of, I'm tired of hearing what these kids can't do. Come to me what they can do. And I'm going to build a defense around what they can do. That's what good coaches have to do in college. And if you can't do that, look at Todd Monken, Ryan. Go break down Todd Monken's offense at Oklahoma State and then break down his offense at Georgia, and you're going to see two completely different offenses. But a lot of the same principles, accuracy, getting into space, precision, all those type of things, being able to run the football. His Oklahoma State offenses were pretty balanced. I think he had Joseph Randall back then, if I remember correctly, right? But they had Brandon Weed at quarterback, so they did things a certain way. It's very prolific. Comes to Georgia, different type of football player, different type of roster. But he still built a really good offense around it. It looked very different. That's what good coaches do. And so, to me, that's my thing is with the young talent Notre Dame has on the roster. I'm not hearing any excuses this year from anybody about why the defense isn't really, really good. I'm sorry. I'm just not. Because if you can't get it from this group, then you're the problem. They're not. I'm sorry.
Brian, do you remember there was a play against North Carolina last year? It was a touchdown for Josh Downs where he ran a whip route into the end zone, right? For people that don't know what a whip route is, it's where you run, you kind of fake like you're just kind of running a hook, and then you'll either break inside or out, right? Like I think Wes Welker used to really love doing that route, Danny Amendola, like those guys, right? So he ran a whip route against Jack Kaiser. And I remember everyone was like, Jack Kaiser stinks. He can't cover. And I'm like, but guys, why is he covering Josh Downs one-on-one in that situation? That's my frustration.
In a man situation. That's bad coaching.
That's my frustration. And I fight back against the Notre Dame doesn't have speed stuff a lot, Brian. But who makes that an argument is the Notre Dame coaching staff that doesn't put the speed on the field. That's who does it. It's not right. It's just really frustrating, man. Right. I could talk all day about that one, though, because it's just like, yes, you make it look like you don't have speed because you don't play your most talented players all the time. You don't do it. So then the very stereotypical insult
in positions where their talent thrives.
Exactly.
I mean, you can't watch Jack Kaiser against Clemson and watch Jack Kaiser against Navy and watch Jack Kaiser in some of these other games where he's playing more near the box, make a ton of plays and tell me that kid shouldn't be playing more.
Right.
Well, that kid should be on the bench is what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Well, okay. In this 3rd and 7, yes, he should be on the bench or inside. Right? So stop putting him, like you said, stop putting him in that situation. Don't ask him to do that. And then if he gets beat doing that, don't get mad at him. You knew he couldn't do that. He's never been able to do that. And that's my whole thing.
And yeah, he might not be a great athlete playing the rover position, but you know where he would be a much better athlete at, Brian? Playing will linebacker, playing inside as an inside linebacker. Like that's where his athleticism will now become a strength for a guy like a Jack Kaiser, for instance. Yeah. I mean, you talk about a Ramon Henderson. Like Ramon Henderson's athletic, but moving over to safety, he turns into a great athlete for a safety. Right. He was a good athlete at corner. Now he's a great athlete at safety.
Good because he couldn't flip his hips really well.
Exactly.
Well, now he doesn't have to really flip his hips. And when he does, he's doing it from 15, 20 yards off the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about safety. I mean, look at I talked. This point was about young athletes, but you look at safety. This is going to be the most athletic safety tandem that Notre Dame has had in a very long time. In Xavier Watson and Ramon Henderson, very long time. Okay, you got to get those guys ready to go. You got to get them ready to play. And so that's to me. And you take a guy like Clarence Lewis. Okay, he's not a dynamic athlete corner, but you put his skill set and put it to safety and let him be a cover safety, and all of a sudden, it's a good football player. It's a really good football player. And so that's my whole point, Ryan, is I'm tired of the whole, well, we're not athletic enough. We don't do this. Well, then play this other guy more. And I thought that's a good thing that I thought Mike Mickens and Chris O'Leary did is by the end of the year, you got Benjamin Morrison playing a ton. You've got Xavier Watts playing a ton, who was still really new to safety. And once all of a sudden Xavier Watts starts playing more, and all of a sudden you don't look as slow at safety now. When you look at the bowl game, you're like, this is the fastest I've seen Notre Dame safeties move in a long time when Ramon and Xavier are on the field together.
Yeah.
And, that's where it is. So I want to see that, Ryan. I want to see those young guys be used more. You've got the depth and you got to be careful. You can't get too nichey to where when those guys are on the field, it's coming. Right. But you've got to try to eliminate as often as possible certain matchups and certain looks. So, so it's if Jack's on the field and he's got to be out in space, then make sure you're making the right calls, that you're allowing him to be real physical and reroute and jam the slot and then pass it off to somebody else. Right. And there's all types of
play more zone than just playing straight man across the board.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Exactly. So like if you play cover 2, then Jack can play inside leverage, and now he's in a better position to jam on an over cross route. And if a guy runs an out, it's okay. You got the corner squatting on him. You're in a much better situation. Or there's different things you can do, right? And so that's kind of where I'm at with it, Ryan. Is there's too much talent now? Is there enough talent to be a top 10 defense? That I don't know. There's a lot more question marks that we're about to dive into to be that. And how well these next set of questions get answered is going to tell us if they're good enough for that. I don't know if they're good enough to be a top 10 defense, Ryan. Like top 10 meaning like just talent and production and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But the thing that frustrates me is I look around and I'm saying, okay, are you going to tell me that Iowa has better athletes than Notre Dame? Are you going to tell me that Wisconsin has better athletes than Notre Dame? Are you going to tell me that Illinois, top to bottom, has better athletes than Notre Dame? Minnesota?
Sure played like it last year.
Yeah. Now, is Devin Witherspoon a stud? Heck yes, he is.
Absolutely.
But Devin Witherspoon played what position, Ryan?
Cornerback.
That's not exactly a concern for Notre Dame. They're fine there. So that's the thing that kind of frustrates me is, well, they can't do this and they can't do that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm so tired of hearing all that stuff. When I watch other teams that are really good come out and play, with athletes that don't match what Notre Dame's putting on the field, I get really tired of it. And it gets old after a while. It gets really tiresome after a while, and yeah, I'm over it. And especially when you watch how this team didn't even play well against Ohio State last year and still kept Ohio State in check. Athleticism's not Notre Dame's problem. Again, are they elite? No, they're not there yet. Are they pretty flipping good? Yeah, they are. They are. And I'm tired of watching Wisconsin and Iowa and teams like that have top 10 defenses and say, oh, well, why can't Notre Dame do that? Why? Because they're not coached as well as what Jim Leonard coached his defense to be, as what Phil Parker coached his defense to be, as what Joe Rossi coached his defense to be. That's the difference. They maximize what their players do. Joe Rossi has one of the most basic defenses you'll ever see. But you know why it's so good? Because they play freaking fast.
Yeah.
And they never make mistakes because they just line up and play. Now, when they play certain teams who have way better players, they get exposed, right? Michigan exposed that because Michigan had way better players. But more often than not, they do well because those kids flat out know how to play. And that's where Al Gold needs to focus. Stop trying to show everyone how smart you are and make it about how smart the players can be. And if you do that, man, I think this defense could be really good.
Well, I mean, because it's all about development in some of those schools that you talked about, right? I mean, it's no secret at like Illinois this last year, they developed those guys, and when they're now juniors and seniors, like they all break out, right? It's like, wow, where'd Devin Witherspoon come from? He's played the last 2 years. It's just the simple fact that he's getting better each and every year. And I think that lack of development's the big thing. I mean, someone said Oklahoma State in the chat, Brian, in 2021 when they had a really good defense. Malcolm Rodriguez was a former 5'10", 5'11" safety recruit, like a 3-star kid. And then all of a sudden, he's one of the best linebackers in college football in 2021. Why did that happen? Not because Malcolm Rodriguez is this big, long, athletic stud. It's because he's a worker and he was developed properly. Jim Knowles developed him.
What'd the NFL think of Malcolm Rodriguez?
Won the 6th round, I think.
6th round.
6th round, yeah.
6th round. Great college football player.
Yeah.
Same thing with that edge rusher they had. The kid was like 6'2", 230 that year under Jim Knowles.
Colin Oliver? Oliver. Yeah.
So, yeah, they weren't out there putting out a bunch of future first-round NFL. There was no Justin Gilbert on their defense in 2021, right? There was no guys like that. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of kids that knew how to play. That's what they had.
I even think of what Jim Knowles did in year 1 at Ohio State with Tommy Eichenberg. Tommy Eichenberg's not like this freak athlete or anything, man. It's just he developed him properly and he's smart. Like, that's the difference, man. All of these teams, you talk about the playmakers and the great players they're putting out there. It's about development. It's not that they came in. Here's the star crowd again, right, Brian? You need 5 stars that just are from day one or studs. Yeah, sure. Everyone needs those guys. But you know what else they need? They need coaches that can develop properly and get those guys to play to their peak. That's what they need, right? And I think that's what Notre Dame has been missing in certain years, is that some positions just have not been developed properly. They have not been developed enough. There's no reason that you can't get more out of the talent that's on the defensive side of the roster. And again, we're talking about a defense that wasn't bad in 2022. It was good, but it needs to be better. There's no doubt about that. And it can be better, and it should be better, and it has to be better. That's kind of the end-all, be-all for me.
So, Ryan, that kind of leads us into sort of the question marks for this team. So part 2 of this is going to be, what are the areas that we need to see improvement, or what are the question marks / concerns for the defense this year? And I think it begins right where we left off with the strengths. Is Al Golden going to make the changes to how, and it's across the board, changes to your scheme, changes to your preparation, how you teach, how you practice, how you coach, what is your emphasis? There needs to be a wholesale kind of reboot on defense. Now, I'm not saying change the defense. What I'm saying is teach it differently. You tried to cross-train everybody and their mother last year. You threw everything at them during the spring, and look what happened. They mastered nothing. So what I'm saying is he going to be one to come in this spring and say, okay, let's really have this be a foundational spring. Yeah, we're going to throw stuff at you scheme-wise, but we need to make sure these kids know where to line up precisely, how to attack, how to get downhill, how to use their hands, how to use their feet, how to be efficient, all that kind of stuff. Are they going to do that or not? Or is it just going to be more of the same? I think the big thing for me is how much is Al Golden willing to adapt and adjust what he did last year, see what went right, and say, okay, yes, part of this is going to be the players now know it, they'll do better there. That's part of it. But the other part of it is, what did we do as a staff that prevented them from learning it and being better at it sooner, and fix that? It's got to be both. And so to me, the biggest question mark I have, because here's what I do not doubt. Al Golden knows football. No doubt about that. My question is, however, is he too far gone from being a college coach to get back to coaching college players? That's my question. Can he teach to the level that the younger players can accept and adapt? Because if you can't teach to your freshman and sophomore class, therefore they can't play because they haven't picked it up, that's not their problem. That's your problem as a coach. If Coach Golden is able to kind of get back to basics, which I know deep down he knows, I think this defense could be really good, because if it becomes about a combination of the talent and Al Golden's long history of being able to teach fundamentals and all that kind of stuff, then I think this defense can be good. If it becomes a combination of the talent plus his football knowledge, as opposed to his football knowledge over here and the players are just desperately trying to catch up, if he can meet them in the middle, that's where I think this defense could take off, because I do think he's a smart guy. I think he's a good guy. I've never heard a single bad thing about Al Golden as a person. I have some problems with the way that he coaches, but I've heard nothing but good things about him as a human being. And that goes all the way back almost 20 years to when I had run-ins with Al Golden when we were on the recruiting trail or at coaches conventions, and he was one of the few Division I coaches that would talk to anybody. He didn't care where you were. He was nice. He was good. He was decent. He would talk ball. If a D3 coach came up to him and say, "Coach, I kind of talk to you about some," let's do it. Right? You don't get that a lot from D1 coaches. And so I like him personally, and that's why I want to see him do well. So part of me deep down, Ryan, was kind of glad he didn't move on to the NFL, because I really want to see him be successful, but he's not going to be successful if he doesn't adapt and meet the players in the middle, right? It's not all just about here's my defense, and it's eventually they're going to catch up to me over here. No, it's they're here, you're here, and you got to be able to come together, because if it becomes more about the talent than your scheme, then you're going to be pretty good. If you can then marry those two things together where your talent is really good and they know it, and your scheme is really good and they know it, that's where you get dangerous. And that's where I think this team could be really good. And so the more he does that, Ryan, the better this team is going to be.
Because I refuse to accept that Al Golden doesn't understand. I mean, one, he's a coach, right? He's been coached a long time, so he understands the basics of how to play the game of football. But Brian, I mean, you remember when he was at Temple, right? It's like he wasn't getting a bunch of studs at Temple. They were just developing good football players at Temple. Like, that's how he was successful at like a lower level, and then obviously why he keeps getting jobs, right? And he keeps going, he went to the NFL for a reason. You don't get to the NFL if you don't know what you're doing. Like, that's just kind of point blank to it, right? Like, obviously he knows what he's doing as a coach. It's just about there's a different landscape in college football than when you were here last. It just is a little bit different, right? And you have to emphasize certain things in a college landscape that you don't have to do as much in the NFL. Guys come to the NFL with kind of that baseline intact, right? Like, you know where you're going to build off of in the NFL level. College football, you're building guys up from the roots, right? From the baseline, from the onsets. Like, you have to really build those guys up. And I think that for me, I'm hoping that this offseason has been a kind of a sit back opportunity for Al Golden and be like, hey man, got to get back to the basics here, brother. Like, why were you a 20-plus year man in college football? Why were you the University of Miami head coach at one time? Why did you get taken into an NFL roster and help a team go to the Super Bowl? It's because at the core, you are a good coach. You are. It's just about, are you the right coach for this situation? Are you willing to take a step back and strip yourself down a little bit, man, and say, like, hey, like, I need to get back to this, this, and this. I can't be that right now. I can't be this type of guy. And I think that he has everything in it. And again, it's nothing personal with Al Golden. I think he's a good person. I've never heard anything negative. I mean, literally, he coached at Temple for several years, and Temple was literally, from where I lived, when I was growing up, was about 20 minutes right over the bridge, and I followed him very in-depthly because he did a great job with Temple, specifically back in the day.
Yeah.
But I think it's really about getting back to basics, man. We always say back to basics for players a lot. Like, get back to the basics, build yourself back up. But coaching's the same, because NFL is a completely different animal than what college football is. Al Golden's got it in him. Is he going to take advantage of it? Is he going to build himself back up from the base of as a college coach? I don't know. But that's something that remains to be seen this offseason, obviously.
Right. Ryan, you want to know what kind of football coach Al Golden was? Here's what kind of football coach Al Golden was. Okay, let's look at for 4 is 8. Let's look at the 13 years before Al Golden came to Temple. Here's what the record was: 1-10, 2-9, 1-10, 1-10, 3-8, 2-9, 2-9, 4-7, 4-7, 4-8, 1-11, 2-9, 0-11.
Yeah.
His first year, they went 1-11. Now, keep in mind something about Temple during that time, right? They were a Big East team and all that kind of stuff, right? They were terrible. And then Al Golden comes in, they go 1-11 in year one. They went 4-8, 5-7, 9-4, 8-4. Now, part of that you have to take into account. During a lot of that stretch where they were terrible, they were a Big East team. In his stretch, they moved to the MAC. I'm all for honesty. That's right. He didn't go 9-4 in the Big East. However, Ryan, you know how bad Temple was. Those years they were going to 0-11 and 1-11 and 2-9. They just sucked in the MAC too. Right.
Ryan, I saw firsthand the first college football game I ever went to was Temple against Virginia Tech and Michael Vick, and Virginia Tech beat them 64-6. So yes, I've seen how bad Temple football is.
In 2005, before Al Golden got there, before they joined the MAC officially, because they joined the MAC officially in 2007. In 2005, the year before Al Golden got there, they lost to Toledo at home 42-17, lost at home to Western Michigan 16-19, lost at home to Bowling Green 70-7 to Bowling Green. That was post Urban Meyer. So that was Greg Brandon's team, not an Urban Meyer team. They lost to Miami of Ohio 41-14, and they lost to Navy 38-17. All right. So those were not very good football teams. They were bad football teams. So you could say, oh, well, they joined the MAC. I just showed you what they did in the MAC. In his first year, they lost to Buffalo 9-3. That was a 2-10 Turner Gill coached football team. Okay.
Man.
They lost to Western Michigan 41-7. They lost to Vanderbilt 43-14. Okay. They lost to Kent State 28-17. They lost to Northern Illinois 43-21. They lost to Central Michigan 42-26. The point being, they lost to Navy 42-6. The point I'm making is this. They started that transition into the MAC before and were getting destroyed. They beat Bowling Green that year. So in the 2-year stretch, they went like 1-7, 1-8 against MAC teams in his last year and then first year. By the end, they're an 8-9 win football team. This guy knows football. My concern is, what has the NFL time done to him?
Right.
And now that he's going into year 2, can he learn from his mistakes? Because I'm telling y'all right now, most of us don't have a real high opinion of Al Golden and the job he did this year. And that's fair. But if Al Golden kind of gets back to basics and gets back to being the guy that was at Temple and not the guy that was at with the Bengals, this defense is going to be really good. If he can find that middle ground, I'm telling you, this defense is going to be really good. And I hope it happens. I really do, because I'd love to see him have success, because I think he's a decent human being. He's a decent man. And I always root for guys like that. But the reality is, you got to do the job, because I'm not going to praise you as a coach just because you're a good person. I mean, you praise someone as a coach for the job they do as a coach, and I'll praise them for the person that human being is. Just like if a guy's a good football coach but a scumbag of human being, I'll say, guy's a great football coach. Horrible person. You know, Hugh Freeze, great football coach. Human being, that's up for debate. You know what I'm saying? We'll see if he's truly redeemed from his time at Liberty. I have my doubts. But hopefully he is. But that's the point, Ryan. I hope he does well. But he's got to show it. I hope that there's a little bit of a signal that he is making that change, Brian. Because like the one thing that we've talked about is, you know, if you're not going to get the job done as a defensive coordinator, you better be recruiting your butt off, right? And we didn't hear for a few months. We didn't hear Al Golden's name talked about at all, right? And then he starts sending out all these offers, and you're like, I still don't understand what's happening. The one positive I will say, just from talking to recruits in 2024 and 2025, I'm hearing his name a lot more, which I think is a good thing. That's a good sign. Now, will that translate to being more self-aware as a coach? We'll see. But ultimately, at least there's like some sign that like maybe there's something happening good here, right? Like maybe there's a change happening. It has to happen ultimately on the field. But I did just say that like that's one okay sign that maybe it's happening, but hopefully. But you say, okay, would he have done that had James Laurinaitis not left?
It's a great question.
Question mark.
It's a great question.
All right, so point number 2, Ryan, and we won't spend a lot of time on this. Red zone defense has to get a lot better. Yep. And I think there's a lot of things that go into it. Scheme is part of it. Production's part of it. You need playmakers step up's part of it. There's a lot. That's something that I want to see them focus on this spring. And the nice thing is, here's one good thing that we'll see this spring. Hopefully they have red zone periods this spring, because Notre Dame's offense was one thing they were really good at last year was red zone. They were a top 20 red zone team in red zone touchdowns. Tommy Rees in 2 of his 3 years had top 15 caliber red zone offenses, right? So that's an area where they're really good. And so to me, I want to see those two go at each other. And Jared Parker obviously had really good success in the red zone at West Virginia, and that was his primary job as offensive coordinator, was red zone. So if there's a lot of battles, we hopefully will see it get better this year, because if they can simply just get better in the red zone, they're going to be a top 25 defense easily. If they just get better in the red zone. Now, top 10, that's going to determine by the other things that we discussed.
Sure.
The next part of it, Ryan, is we talked a lot about how talented the D-line is. There's a big difference between talent and production. And so one of the biggest questions I have this year is, you cannot only have a pass rush that comes about by scheme. That's just not going to win you the big games. For me, it's going to be, what can you do to generate a pass rush with your players? And that, to me, is one of the big question marks we're going to see. Now, look, we talked about Botelho and Burnham and Gobira and Junior and Baptiste and Riley Mills inside. And there's a lot of options there. But right now, none of them have proven to be consistent pass rushers. Botelho flashed some really impressive moments, But then you go back and watch against Marshall, and you're like, I had no plan. He was terrible. Can he do it consistently? So that's another question mark this spring is, the talent's there, Ryan, but you don't win with talent. You win with production. Now, the talented, if the production's coming from really talented players, then obviously you're going to be Georgia, you're going to be Bama, you're going to be Ohio State, right? But there's also teams out there, Ryan, that have had a lot of talent but don't play. Miami's talent was far better than what their record was last year. The talent has to equal the production. Notre Dame's production last year on defense was not nearly as good as its talent level, in my opinion. So will that catch up this year? That's a big question mark. And the pass rush is one of those areas. And this kind of impacts all the things. Run game has to get better. You have to be more consistent against the run, right? Well, that comes to me from the talent's got to be able – you have to have talent to make plays. Pass rush has to get better. You have to have talent to do that. You have to be able to be better. But part of it is if you can get your D-line playing into its potential, now all of a sudden your run game gets better just like that. Yeah. Your pass game gets better. And your red zone gets better because now if you have a really legit pass rush that you can pin its ears back, because why? I can play a lot of man in the red zone. I can play a lot of man in the red zone and turn guys loose, and I'm going to heat you up. And that's where you can have some success. So the who the pass rushers are at the first and second level, so D-line and linebackers, is going to be a big question mark this spring. And the better we come out of spring knowing who those guys are going to be, and hopefully it's more than one of those guys, the better I'm going to feel about this defense.
Yeah, and I think for me too, it's like with how the defensive line recruiting went in 2023 and how it seems to be continuing in 2024, just the ideology of the defensive line in general, Brian, from a pass rush perspective, is Al Washington's betting on himself a lot, man, with the recruits he's bringing in, right? Because it's like there's no doubt that he's bringing in tools. There's no doubt that there's tools on the roster. There's no doubt that the 2023 four-man haul had crazy tools. I don't think anybody can push back against that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to bring in these high ceiling, low floor type of dudes, you got to be able to coach and develop. You have to be able to. And that's kind of the big concern here is, we talked about Al Golden, but can Al Washington get this defensive line to play better in 2023, than what it did in 2022? I think it's possible, but you have to see it tangibly because you can't now, if you're Al Golden, just sit back and be like, it's all right. I got Isaiah Foskey. He had 11 sacks last year. He's going to do some good stuff from a pass rush perspective. He's going to figure it out. Nah, man. You need to work with your leading sacker returning is Jordan Botelho, who had 4.5. And like 4.5, I thought that there was a lot of great flashes, like you said, right? A lot of great flashes, yes.
Do you remember how many sacks Isaiah Foskey had as just a rotation player before he became a starter?
4.5? Yeah. 4.5. So we've seen that jump happen.
Too, he didn't play a lot of snaps last year, Ryan. Jordan Botelho was sub 200 in snaps last year. I mean, so you're talking about a guy that didn't play a whole lot of snaps last year. I'm actually looking at it right now. According to Pro Football Focus, Jordan Botelho had I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Jordan Botelho had 127 snaps, total snaps. That's all he played.
127?
127, according to Pro Football Focus. He had 77 pass rush snaps last year. 77. He had a pass rush. He had a pressure, a hurry, a hit, or a sack on 18 of those 77 snaps.
That's an absurd win rate, man.
That's insane.
That win rate's absurd.
Insane win rate. And so, that's the whole thing, Ryan, is let's just say, okay, so he had 18 total pressures on 77 snaps, okay? Yeah. So that's – let's say he had as many pass rushes as Isaiah Foskey had last year. He would have 73 hurries, like pressures, total pressures, hurries, sacks, or hits. Isaiah Foskey had 33. Now, again, if you put him out over the entire year, that always goes down. It always goes. But how much does it go down? Does he go down to 60, 50, 40? Those are the things you look at and say, boy, did the light go on for him or did they just use him correctly late in the year? Well, if you used him correctly, keep doing that niche and add another 100 snaps onto it. Maybe he doesn't get up to the 300 some rushes that Foskey had, but maybe you get him to 200, and all of a sudden he's an 8-9 sack specialist. Right. At the very least, he could do that. So when you talk about his production last year, Ryan, I mean, he flashed it, but here's the thing. Flashing it as a niche role player is a whole different animal than flashing it as a starter, and that's what Jordan has to show. But there's nothing. Well, I'll ask this, Ryan, or I'll say this, and you tell me if you disagree or not, because this is a fair question. I see a guy in Jordan Botelho that doesn't lack for anything that he would need to be an every down Viper. I think he can drop into coverage. I think he can rush the quarterback. He's twitchy. He's pretty physical at the point of attack. I think he can hold up against the run. Other than maybe I wish he was maybe an inch or two longer, maybe a couple inches longer in length.
Sure.
I don't see any traits that are lacking as a player. The only thing that's really kept him down has been just him, really. I mean, you're talking about a guy that in the bowl game last year played 48 snaps and had 10 pressures.
He had 10 pressures in the bowl game?
Yeah.
That's wild, man.
7 hurries, 2 sacks, and a hit. So, yeah, but and that was the only time. Against Syracuse, he only had 10 pass rushes, right? And he had 4 pressures. He had 2 sacks, a hit, and a hurry. Against Boston College, he only had 4 pass rushes, and he had a sack. I mean, against Navy, he had 7 pass rushes, and he had 2 hurries. I mean, so this is what he did all year. It's just the volume went up, and guess what? The pressure stayed in line with that. Now, could he do that over the course of the year? That's a bigger question. But at the very least, you're talking about a guy that has a chance to be pretty good if he can carry that over to some degree.
I mean, and for context, you said 73 pressures, right? It would have kind of, equaled out to if he had the same snaps as
72.7, so I just rounded up to 73.
Yeah, and that would have been the most of college football last year, I believe. I think, if I remember correctly, I think Braylon Trice had like 67, and he was the highest in college football, I believe.
You want to put it into context. Remember how good Will Anderson was a couple years ago?
Yes.
Will Anderson had 82 pressures that year. But he did that on 482 pass rushes. I projected Botelho simply to have the same number of pass rushes that Isaiah Foskey had last year, which wasn't near what Anderson had. Isaiah was in the 300s. Isaiah had last year had 300 and let me see here, 311. So if you take that, I'm going to do this for context. So if you say he had 18 pressures on 77 pass rushes, and you give him the same number of pass rushes that Will Anderson had, according to Pro Football Focus in 2021, he'd have had 113 pressures. Will Anderson had 82. Right. So again, I'm not saying he's going to do that. He won't, because when you go from a guy that's really fresh and to a guy that's you're now in week 7 of this, you're just trying to show the production per snap is what you're saying. Like that's what you're showing. Phenomenal. Here. Now, will that be the case if he does it, if he plays 48 snaps a game? I'm not saying that, but it's still going to be pretty good. I'm trying to put in context when he was able to play last year and he showed some really impressive stuff. Now against Marshall, he wasn't very good. Yeah. But it was the second game playing. He was a Rover the year before.
There was also a lot of players against Marshall that were very good. So.
But for him, I'm willing to give him a pass in Marshall when he looked better late in the year, because against Marshall, he was still transitioning back to being an edge player, where the year before he was playing Rover. It's a different animal. And that's my point. So if Jordan can keep his head on straight, he's got a chance to be special. And you still have Josh Burnham. You still have Aiden Gobira. You still have Junior Chilamaka. You have Javonte Jean-Baptiste. You have some really talented players. And Javonte Jean-Baptiste is another guy, Ryan, that if you look at his production last year, his per snap production was pretty good as a pass rusher. So looking at him last year, he had 14 pass rushes, or was it the year before? I think it might have been the year before, in 2021. Let me just look up this number here real quick. With Javonte Jean-Baptiste. So give me 1 second. This is loading a bit slowly today. So it was last year. So let's just take his last 2 years. So he had 132 pass rushes this past year and 173 the year before. That gets him to 305. That's 6 fewer than Isaiah Foskey. And in that stretch, he had, according to Pro Football Focus, 31 pressures. Isaiah Foskey had 33 on 6 more snaps. So 2 more pressures on 6 more snaps, slightly lower rate than what Isaiah Foskey had last year. And so there are guys there, is my point. It's how are you going to use them? And how are you going to develop them and get the most out of them? That's the question.
Well, and I think that the potential too is, Brian, if we're talking about just strictly from a pass rush perspective, right, is that if a couple of those Vipers do step up, and let's say that Jordan Botelho is playing good football and Joshua Burnham's playing good football, imagine what you could do on pressure downs, right? Where you're like, okay, I'm still keeping 4 on the field, or I'm doing a 3-man front. There might be some situations where you say like, hey, Burnham and Jordan Botelho are your 2 defensive ends in this situation. And that gives you more rush upside as well. Like maybe even you kick a guy like Javonte Jean-Baptiste inside at sometimes in like a NASCAR type of look, right? So I think that you really need a bunch of guys to step up at that position, because I think it makes everyone around them better as well. So certainly talent, but at the end of the day, production needs to follow at some point. Everyone's excited about Jordan Botelho. I talked to Isaiah Foskey at the Combine. He was excited about Jordan Botelho. I talked to Nick Herbig, who played with him in St. Louis High School out there in Honolulu. He's very excited about Jordan Botelho. I know there's a lot of fans.
They were teammates, Ryan, and Jordan Botelho was a significantly better player in high school.
Yes.
It wasn't close. It wasn't close. Jordan's issues have not been talent. It's been he hasn't been able to keep himself on the field because of just he's got to make better decisions. But he did last year. He did. He kept himself on the field all year last year, which starts to get you excited about what he could be. There's no question. Next one, Ryan, is linebacker production. Yep. Notre Dame's linebacker production last year was really bad. It was really bad. And I'm not talking tackles per se. Tackles weren't great, but they weren't terrible, especially when you add all linebackers up, because they did play some guys. But the what I'm talking about are the impact numbers. And I've pointed this out before. We don't need to dive into the numbers again. I pointed this out on the show a couple weeks ago. You look at the number of just tackles for loss that this defense had last year at the linebacker position. It was not good. It was not good at all. And it simply put, it has to get better. You can't go through another year of where your linebackers have only 19.5 sacks as a unit. You can't. You need to be mid 25 is just okay, and you're well below that. And I mean, Ryan, you're talking about years in the past where you're starting 2 inside linebackers will do that by themselves. I mean, you had 18.5 sacks at linebacker from Tavon Coney and Drew Tranquill in 2018. And the part of the reason for that it was even that low was because you had 3 defensive linemen that were over 10 in Okwara, Kareem, and Jerry Tillery. You're talking about 2017, Tavon Coney and Drew Tranquill, the rover and a rotation guy, combined for 23 tackles for loss. You look at the 27 defense at linebacker, which had Tavon Coney, it had Drew Tranquill, it had Niles Morgan, it had Greer Martini, and you had Osmar Bilal. It's a talented group, right? So I'm trying to get some context. It's a talented group. They had 35.5 tackles for loss in Mike Elko's first year coaching that defense. Like they need to be closer to that, in my opinion, on this defense to have that kind of production that they need. And so the talent is there. It's just, will we see it? That's the thing. And I don't care as much about sack numbers. I care about tackles for loss. I care about impact plays in the pass game, pass breakups, interceptions, and sacks combined. I want to see more of all those categories. So if the sacks are the same, but they make more pass breakups and more interceptions, then your pass game impact has gone up. If you don't maybe make a lot more impact plays and breakups and interceptions, but your sack numbers go way up at linebacker, that's making an impact in the pass game. So I don't care how they do it. We just need to see a lot more impact in the pass game from them as well. But just the overall disruption production has to take a huge jump. If you're anywhere close to the 19.5 tackles for loss you got from your linebackers last year, this defense isn't going to be a lick better, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and sorry, I thought you were going to continue with your statement there. My apologies.
I nailed it. It's just got
you did nail it. You did nail it. You great finish there, Brian.
I just had you so enamored you just wanted more. Is that what you're saying to me?
I was just going through my mind of how many articles I've written over the last few weeks where I'm like, Notre Dame has had an incredibly impressive haul in 2023 and 2022 from a linebacker perspective, signing a 7-man class of this player or that player. And then you think back to what they were in the 2022 season, and it makes you sad. It makes you really, really sad because there's easily talent there, man. Like you can't look at that linebacker room. even if you're not a JD Bertrand guy, even if you're not a Jack Kaiser guy, even if you think Maris Loifel shouldn't play another down for Notre Dame, you can't look at the entirety of that room and be like, that's not a talented group. That's
right.
That's just no. That's moronic. You can't do that, man. Joshua Burnham is now playing Viper. Get that. Junior Tyler Mock is playing a little bit of Viper as well. I get that. But man, you still have Nolan Ziegler. You still have Jalen Sneed. You still have Drake Bowen on campus now. You still have Jaden Osbury on campus now. You still have Preston Zitzer on campus now. There is a lot of talent in that linebacker room. Point blank. Will not move it past this point, Brian. Linebacker play needs to be a ton better than what it was in 2022. And it is talent that is on the field. Nothing to do with that. It needs to be developed better. It needs to be put in better position. If you can't find a role, and this is my general opinion, if you can't find a role for Maris Loifel to impact your team in some way, I'm not asking him to be a full-time Will.
A game.
Not asking him to be a full-time Will. But if you can't find a simplistic niche role where an athlete like Maris Loifel at 6'2.5", 6'3", with long arms and athleticism can't help your football team, that's not Maris' fault. It's not Maris' fault, in my opinion. So
now, Marist is the reason he can't be an every down player. That's partly on him. He makes mistakes that nobody else makes, which here's the rule of thumb, Ryan. When you have a lot of guys making similar mistakes, it's a coaching problem. When you have one guy that does things that nobody else does wrong, that's a him problem. And to a degree, Marist issues are on Marist. Simple as that. And so, to me, I want to see that. I need to interrupt here real quick. We got some people that need to chill out in the chat. Archer, the Ohio State fan, has always been respectful in our chat. And I don't like how a particular person is going at him right now. If you want to engage respectfully. We're not going to have that in our chat and on our show. Okay? Back on track. Here's the deal about the linebacker play, to your point. If Maris can't be more consistent in his execution, fine. Then make him Bo Bauer on third down. Bo had it was just turn Bo loose, just let him go, just run. He doesn't have a ton of responsibility. To me, JD Bertrand is one of the most underappreciated players in the entire Notre Dame roster, in my opinion. Now, was he great last year? No, he wasn't great. He was good. He was a solid he was a much better football player than I think a lot of fans give him credit for, in my view. He needs to be better. Jack Kaiser, when put in position to do things he does well, was a really good football player last year for Notre Dame. When he got put in positions where his skill set wasn't ideally suited, then he got in trouble. So again, find a better niche for him. To your point, Ryan, when you look at a guy like Jalen Sneed, find a way to use him. When you look at a guy like Nolan Ziegler, find a way to use him. There's just, when you look at Jaden Osbury, look, there's just, the reality is there's just too much, like you said, Ryan, too many guys. You've got to find a role for these guys. It's as simple as that. And I want to see Notre Dame do that. And if they can do that, then this team should be pretty good. That's where I'm at. So Ryan just had a little bit of an internet issue. He'll be back here in a second. So that's obviously an area of concern for me when you move forward. And then the last one for me, when we look at the defense, yes, they need to do all those kind of things, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to circling back to the first one. It's really up to Coach Golden to say, this is who we have. You can't go out there and sign a bunch of free agents this offseason. You can't do that. You can't make trades in college football. These are the players that you have. It's your job to say, what do they do well? And let's build around what they do well. Because if your guys are not able to do certain things, you can't, and you're asking them to do that in games and they're just not doing it well. That's not on them. That's on you, because you know that they don't do certain things well. And any coach that asks a player to do something that through time and proven preparation and what you see in practice and all that he's not good at, and you still keep asking him to do that because it's your system, then your system is flawed or you're not a very good coach. Find out what these kids do well and build around them, because there's just too much talent in this football team for Notre Dame not to be better than it was. Now, are they where Georgia is defensively? No. Are they where Alabama was 6-7 years ago defensively? No. Are they where Ohio State was talent-wise in 2019? No. I'm not saying that, but they are certainly much better talent-wise than where they were last year relative to how their production equals. And those are the things that I want to see really improve, is get the most out of your talent. And then when you can look at it, if you could look back on this team and say, okay, we got the most that we could out of these players. We maximize what Jack Kaiser can do and what JD can do, what Maris can do, what Howard Cross can do, what Xavier can do. You go across the board and you feel like our units, if you feel like you were able to get the most out of them, then I'm good with saying, okay, you were here. You were the 18th ranked defense. Okay. You did a good coaching job. I can't point to anywhere and say, boy, they didn't get enough from the linebackers, the D-line, or the secondary. Then you can look back and say, okay, this is where we are. So then the next thing that we're going to do is say, okay, now we need to get better here. We need to recruit better here. We need to go to the transfer portal and get here in the offseason. We need to do this. We need to do that. And that's fine. That's part of it, is figure out who you are truly, get the most out of what you have. And then if you fall short, then you know more specifically the areas you got to get better. Hey, our linebackers were prepared to play at a high level last year. They just weren't good enough against this team. Our D-line, man, we were coached well. We maximized what we had, but we just weren't good enough to beat this team over here. Totally fine. Then now go out in the portal, go out on the recruiting trail, and get players that are better talents than those guys. The problem for Notre Dame right now is we don't necessarily know how far the gap is from a pure talent standpoint, because when I watch Georgia play, their players are not just talented, they're coached at an extremely high level. And so what you can do at Notre Dame is match them from a coaching standpoint. That's much easier to do for Marcus Freeman and for Jack Swarbrick and for all the decision makers, is to make sure that we have the best coaching staff possible. Then you can say, okay, now where do we need to get to from a talent standpoint? And that's the task in front of Marcus Freeman. And in some ways, I'm confident that if Al Golden does what we're challenging him to do, and that is get back to basics a little bit, make it more about the players and less about how smart you are, then build more and more scheme and get to that point where you feel like you've got that balance to where if I put more on them, then I'm going to start seeing a negative kind of return on that investment. And that's where I want to see him do it. And if he can do that, then I'm completely confident this defense will get a lot better. And we'll have a much better idea of where Notre Dame needs to be from a talent standpoint. And I'll feel better about saying, hey, this is where they are. So that's going to do it for this portion of the show. And we are going to kind of move on to the mailbag next. But before we do, I want to ask y'all folks, please do us a favor. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the CFB Nation podcast and YouTube platform. And look, right now, I'm just going to be honest with you, ad rates are not great right now. You all know what's going on in the economy and those type of things. So if you've thought about, hey, I want to support Irish Breakdown and I want to do these type of things, help out, here's how the best way you can do it. The best way you can support us right now is obviously read all of our free stuff and consume as much as you can. So if we put an article out, read it, that'll help us make up for the fact that the ad rates are lower right now. The other thing you can do is join the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Got a ton of conversation going on. Come join us. That's a great way you can support. You can sign up for $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. If you also want to support maybe beyond that annual or monthly membership, you can also join the Blue Club, the Gold Club, or the Shamrock Club, the Blue and Shamrock Club. If you sign up for that booster club, you also get a free IB mug club or IB Club mug that you'll get free of charge, free shipping. We eat all that. We'll send that to you. It's a very great way for you to support us. If you sign up for the Gold Club, however, you not only get the IB Club mug, but you also get an IB Gold Club t-shirt, color of your choice. We have, I think, 5 or 6 different colors. And it's just a way for us to show our appreciation to you, but also a way for you to support us if you are someone who wants to try to help support us and continue to help us grow and grow and grow. So that's my pitch to y'all. Don't do that very often, but figured now's a good time to step in and ask for that. And if you have signed up for the Gold, the Shamrock, or the Blue Club, then you need to reach out to me. Let me know that you have not received anything yet. and we'll check in because I think we're probably about 20 or 30 people still that have not reached out to let me know I need your address and your shirt size and all that kind of stuff. So most people have got it. So if you haven't got anything like that from us yet, reach out to me. Let me know, hey, I signed up for this, and because I can't ship it if I don't have your address. So that would be a huge, huge help. So that's going to do it for this portion show. We got the mailbag coming up next. If you have some mailbag questions, get them in. We don't have a ton right now, so we probably won't have a very long mailbag, but there's some really good questions in there so far. So again, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up to the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Ryan is back with us now, and we have, Ryan, a few questions here we'll dive into in our mailbag today. We have a two-parter from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Says, IB, there's no doubt talent on the team, but why does it seem like always an excuse not to play the talent? They were not 230 pounds. Now the freshmen are. It seems the goalpost is extended by the playbook. Part 2, they need to learn the whole playbook. Why does Indy handicap themselves constantly instead of playing their best players?
I mean, I don't think that, Brian, like, do you think that there's an exact reason for it, right? Because, like, this has been an issue ongoing at Notre Dame for a while. Like, this isn't just a Marcus Freeman staff issue. This was an issue under Brian Kelly a lot, too.
More so on offense. On offense. And here's why. It really comes down to there are two schools of thought, in my opinion, in coaching. And I'm being very broad. And I think being broad, you can fit coaches into these one or two categories. There are the coaches who believe scheme is the most important. And those coaches tend to think it's about how smart I am.
Right.
That's one lane. The other lane are coaches who everyone knows the scheme matters to a degree. Nobody says, hey, we're just going to line up and run coverage in one scheme all day and we're going to beat you because our players are that good. There's no team that good. None. And so to me, Ryan, if you took an all-star team of players in college football, every team not named Georgia, and you put the best person in the country on that team, and you ran one run play, one pass play, one front coverage, and one front and one coverage all game, that team would get murdered by Georgia and get beat by a lot of other teams. You can't just run.
Sure.
You have to scheme matters. But the other box of coaches are those who believe scheme matters, but what's matter even more is our kids have to be able to do whatever we teach them as fast and with as little thinking as possible. It's about fundamentals and technique and lining up correctly, and it's about them. The best coaches are the ones in that category that get sort of towards that middle ground of I'm a really good X's and O's coach, but the X's and O's are a byproduct of them knowing how to play the game the right way. The coaches who struggle to maximize their talent more often than not are coaches who overemphasize scheme at the expense of technique. And that's why the NFL coaches scare me. Because at the NFL, you're getting guys who've been in college 3, 4, 5 years. They've been taught how to play the game to a degree. It's more about the scheme. In college, it has to be more about how to play. And the perfect example of this is Charlie Weiss, which is why I bring this up. First 2 years, Charlie Weiss inherits a very veteran football team that had already been taught how to line up, how to block, how to tackle, how to snap, and all that kind of stuff, right? How to run routes. So he takes his veteran group. Brady's a junior. You got all these veteran players, and 2 years in a row, they're a top 10 team. Then those veterans leave, and they're replaced by back-to-back outstanding recruiting classes. Bunch of 5-star players. The next 3 teams sucked. Why? Because those kids, those young players that were ultra talented, were not taught how to play the game. It was all about scheme. They didn't know how to line up the right way all the time. They didn't know how to use their technique the right way. They weren't taught the nuances of how to play wide receiver, how to play offensive line, how to play D-line, how to play linebacker, and they constantly underachieved because you had Charlie on one side and John Tenuta on the other side, 2 guys obsessed with showing everyone else how smart they are. And that's not where you got to be. You've got to be a smart coach. You've got to know scheme. You got to know how to adjust. You've got to know how to game plan. But if at the foundation of what you are is not, we got to learn how to line up, we got to learn how to step properly, we got to learn how to take on blocks properly, we got to understand the game from an intellectual level before I can throw millions and millions of concepts on them, right? Being hyperbolic, obviously, there. then you're just not going to maximize your potential. And to me, I think that's what hurt Clark Lee as he got further away from his first year. He got more and more into the scheme and went away from just like the 2018 defense was not an elite defense, Ryan, from the standpoint of they just had like elite players they held, but that team was so good and they were so consistently good because they lined up, they knew what they were supposed to do, and they did it. They did it well. And so even though they didn't have an elite defense and where they were holding teams like 150 yards of offense, they were just good every single week. And it was because of that. Now, in 19 and 20, they were more inconsistent. Why? Because I felt like Coach Lee put a little bit more on them at times maybe than he should have. And at times it was, the COVID year, you lost a lot of the offense. There's other things why, but I think that's part of it as well. And so to me, offensively under Brian Kelly, defensively under Al Golden, I feel like they're still putting too much on these guys as far as what they're asking them to do. And I think Marcus Freeman, to be honest with you, did a little bit of that in 2021 as well. He simplified. Here's the difference, though. I felt like Coach Freeman put more on those players early in 2021. But after a few games, he realized we're putting too much on them. He backed off, said to the players, that's on me. I need you ready to play. And the next rest of the season, they were really good on defense. And they weren't bad again on defense until he got to the bowl game where he was no longer running it. Sure. And so that's the thing for me is Coach Freeman realized, hey, I'm putting too much on him. And the reason why is you come to Notre Dame and you think these are really smart kids, and they are. But you can sometimes make a mistake of assuming that because they're really smart, then I can treat them like NFL players. But the difference is they're not NFL players. They're college kids at a school that makes them go to class, makes them go to study tables, makes them engage the community. They don't have the 100% dedicated to football or 95% dedicated to football that some other schools are. Yeah, and I think that's a mistake a lot of coaches make with these really smart kids. Is they can't be in the film room nonstop because they have a physics exam they have to they have to show up and take the test for. They have a community outreach engagement. And those are not things that they should stop doing. They should still do those things. That's what's so great about being at Notre Dame, in my opinion. But you've got to understand that as a coach and say, hey, I thought we could do a lot of this. I need to scale that back a little bit. Coach Freeman did that in 2021. He realized he put a little too much on him, scaled it back, and that defense was nasty down the stretch in 2021. I don't think Coach Golden ever really made that assessment. And that's my concern. And if he does, Ryan, but if he does, then I think this defense is going to be really good, in my view.
And I'm very hopeful that we're going to see a influx of younger guys getting more opportunity this year and into the future, because I think one thing, Brian, that's an interesting thing is that we do have to consider that it's a first-year coaching staff, right? Like, yeah, there was some rollover from Chris O'Leary was there, Marcus Freeman was there for a second year, Mike Mickens was obviously there. But sometimes when you're so much to figure out and to kind of hit that transitional period, sometimes it's easier to just rely on the known products, right? Like sometimes it's easier to rely on veterans and known commodities. And I think it's a flawed way of thinking. I do, but I do understand to a degree this sense of wanting familiarity around you, wanting guys that have been there, wanting that experience. I get that, right? So I hope that now going into year two under Coach Golden, year two under Al Washington, that they do start to make that pool like, all right, I'm more comfortable now. I'm second year in the system. Let's get some of our younger talent on the field, right? Like we don't have to worry as much about that transitional period anymore. So maybe we'll lie more towards the younger talent versus, just kind of wanting a baseline in year one. So I'm hopeful for that. I am. Will it happen? I have no idea. But I do think that there is some validity to that conversation. Again, I don't know if that's 100% the reason why, but I'm just thinking like, my first year of like teaching, for instance, right? When you go into the classroom for the first time, it's like you lean on the people that have been there and what they know, and you kind of listen and just kind of reflect and start to build out your identity. Year two is where you really kind of take that jump, right? In most professions is like, all right, I know what I'm doing now. I've kind of been through the ringer. I have a better understanding of what's expected and what I need to accomplish. Maybe this is the year that they unlock that potential a little bit. So I hope there's some part of that. But at the end of the day, man, I think that there has to be a push to play in the best talent out there, because you want to talk about what makes you look smart? what makes you look smart is knowing, understand how to utilize multiple talent levels, right? Multiple players into a system that would flex your football intelligence to me. So I hope that there's a push to that in year 2.
That's why I said earlier, right? They need to meet in the middle. It's not just about the players are here and Al Gold's got to come all. No. It's got to be, he's got to go to them and they got to come to him. And if you can find that sweet spot, that's what can make you. And honestly, it's not easy. Otherwise, everybody would do it. It's not easy. And every team every year is different. You're going to have some teams that just have, man, we had these 6 kids that were just wicked smart football guys. So I could do more because I had this really wicked linebacker that could just get everybody lined up like that. I had these 2 safeties that were just great at communicating. I just had these corners I could just go and put on an island, so I don't have to worry about them. You're going to have teams like that. And then you're going to have other years where you don't have that experience. And you don't maybe have those kids who are wicked smart. And you've got to adapt to that. You can't say, well, we did it the same way we did it last year when we were top 5 defense and it just guys didn't figure it out. No. You didn't have those same players. It's your job to coach to what you have, not coach to what you want to be and then blame the players when they don't live up to what, you're trying to do. They got to go make plays. Your job is to put them in position to play to the best of their ability. And if they're not good enough, then go recruit better players. But if you're saying, well, we're trying to do this and they just can't do it, and I got to go, no. That's on you. That's on you. And that's the sweet spot that you got to find. Yeah. Now, speaking of the defense, Ryan, we had Frank McCattry, who's an LSU fan, who's on here, who's one of those non-Notre Dame fans that comes on our channel time, which we greatly appreciate. He had a comment that said Clark Lee and Mike Elko deserve bigger programs. Clark Lee is a very principled man. I think they both are. And that's something a lot of people don't know about Mike Elko as well. They're both very good, decent human beings, hard workers and all that. Clark Lee, I don't know if I say he deserves a better program because it's his alma mater. I think he has a passion for Vanderbilt, and so, but he's got to show me he can win a little bit more before I'm ready to go there. But Mike Elko did a phenomenal job at Duke this year. And if he can build on that, he won't be at Duke very long unless he just wants to be. And again, very good dudes. So you root for them to have success, right? It's partly why I rooted for Marcus Freeman to have success. I'll give Brian Kelly a lot of credit. He hired a terrible defensive coordinator in Brian McGorder. But outside of that, he made some very good defensive coordinator hires. Bob Diaco was a very good hire. Clark Lee was a very good – Mike Elko was a great hire. Clark Lee, promoting him, was a very good hire. Marcus Freeman was a great hire. That's one thing he did well during his time at Notre Dame was outside of that one hire, he did very well when it came to hiring defensive coordinators.
No doubt. And, I mean, Duke's going to be a really interesting team this year too, Brian, because it's like they lost Shaka Hayward, who was a really good linebacker for them, obviously, right? But you got guys like Dwayne Carter coming back, Ruben Oben, who is a really talented pass rusher for them. And then they got their quarterback, Riley Leonard, coming back for his second year as a starter. So Duke's going to be an interesting football team, man. I agree with you, though. If Duke continues trending in the right direction, I don't know if they'll be able to hold on to Mike Elko for too long, but they're going to be a tough team while he's there, I think, because I think that they'll take a nice step. Like, they showed a lot in year one, but I think they're going to take a nice sophomore step for him as well as their coach.
Ryan, here's a very interesting question that we got brought up on Ohio State guy. And he asked, it was from Archer. He said, who's the most important player in the modern era of Notre Dame football when it comes to the program and culture? And I wanted to kind of find out what he meant by that. And here's what he followed up with. He said that I believe Ohio State would have imploded if Braxton Miller got out of his NIL after Tatgate. That's the situation that happened with DeVere Posey and was it Mike Adams and the quarterback, Terrell Pryor. He cemented a culture and was the soul of the team. Who is that guy for Notre Dame? So obviously we're talking like the modern era, like who has had the biggest impact on where Notre Dame is today. There's a lot of different answers you can give. I'm going with Brady Quinn.
Brady Quinn was
here's
my answer,
why.
so yeah.
If Brady Quinn doesn't do what he did at Notre Dame on the field, off the field, there is no manti. There is no insert player. Notre Dame recruited off of the success that Charlie Weiss had with Brady Quinn as a quarterback, as a representative of the university. You talk about a guy that graduated with 2 degrees. I was told he was like a high 3-something GPA. He's got an Irish name. He's always represented the university as a human being extremely well, and they had great success. And that led to the recruiting that then led to the success that Brian Kelly had in 2012. I mean, a lot of that was built off of Charlie's recruiting, and all of Charlie's recruiting was built off of what they did in 05 and 06 with Brady Quinn at quarterback. So if it's not for Brady Quinn, I don't know if there is a Manti Te'o. I don't know if there is that. I don't know if he comes to Notre Dame if not for the success that Charlie had with Brady in his first 2 years. So, and then now today, Brady's still impacting Notre Dame. He started that fund thing. Now, look, I want to see it get even more and expand and get bigger and all that other kind of stuff. But for a startup, it's meeting to a degree some of the need you have when it comes to the NIL stuff. So he's got into the NIL space to help out his institution. He's never shied away from being a Notre Dame guy. He wears that like a badge of honor. You know, where some guys that are in Brady's job understandably say, hey, I want to disassociate myself from my alma mater in this role because I want people to think I'm objective, and I have no problem with that. But I also respect those guys that are okay wearing their school as a badge of honor, but are also willing to say good things and be critical. And I think Brady Quinn is kind of, he tends to be on the side of always going to support Notre Dame, but he'll be critical if he really feels the need is there. But he's always been a great representative of Notre Dame. So he's having an impact, not just, and he mentioned that Braxton Miller is still involved in the community around Ohio, and that's great. I love hearing that stuff. But to me, Brady, if not for Brady Quinn, I think Notre Dame could have gone into a very, very, very dark place. Say, well, Brian Kelly would have got him at it. No. If Brady Quinn doesn't come to Notre Dame, Brian Kelly doesn't come to Notre Dame, in my opinion. If Notre Dame would have gone from where Ty was and continued to get worse, it's not an attractive job. Brian Kelly would have gone to Tennessee or somewhere else. He never would have come to Notre Dame, and we'd be in the desert land right now. And so I think to me, Brady Quinn's that guy for me, Ryan.
Honestly, I saw Archer say this in the chat earlier, and the question, and I know people started putting like Manti in there and stuff, and like Manti's a good answer. Like Manti was incredibly influential for the program, but Brady Quinn was the guy on top of my head. I was just like, I don't think there's any other answer for me. You know, like that's just kind of who it is. Brady Quinn, because again, I kind of want people to understand, like from like my age bracket, especially like in the modern era, I don't remember great football at Notre Dame, really, right? Like when I first started remembering, it was like end of Bob Davie into Tyrone Willingham, and like that wasn't obviously we know the struggles that
weren't you born like when Jerome Bettis was at Notre Dame, right? So I mean, you were 2 years old the last time Notre Dame was a legitimate national title contender.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So obviously I don't remember that. My earliest memories for me, from a personal perspective, was Brady Quinn coming out of nowhere. I mean, he had played obviously the 2 years prior, but like his junior year, man, throwing to Samardzija and throwing to Stovall and throwing to Anthony Fasano and Darius Walker running back. Like that was my first like great memory of Notre Dame football. You know, like that was it. Where you like just were like all of a sudden they went from a dumpster fire to one of the best offenses in college football that year, you know, it was just awesome to watch. And then, like you said, Brian, I mean, the transcendent part of it too is that Archer talks about what Braxton Miller does in the community and Brian, I think Brady Quinn is still a kind of a symbol of the excellence of Notre Dame football, you know, and being a Notre Dame man, even more than just Notre Dame football. He's a great representative of Notre Dame, all the values that it has, both from a football perspective, from a student perspective, from a man perspective. So, yeah, Brady Quinn would be my easy answer in that conversation. Again, I'll accept anybody that says Manti because I think he's very influential. But for me personally, for where my childhood comes from, where, you know, just kind of the continued just beacon of hope that Brady Quinn is at times, right? I think it's Brady Quinn for me pretty easily.
We had a question, and I don't have the question up anymore, but I did have a question about Aiden Keanaaina. What's the latest? As far as I know, he's healthy, fully healthy, and be ready to go this spring. He needs a big spring. I've got a lot to say about that. I'm going to wait to see how the spring goes first. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully, he's given an opportunity to compete this spring and given an opportunity to show what he can do. We shall see. I wanted to pull this up from Notre Dame 2164. This is one of Ryan. You don't know this, but because you came on last year, so you weren't here for that first year. But this is one of our OGs people, right? People that have been with us from the beginning. Notre Dame 2164 said a while back, and I remember this. A while back, I asked you guys to pray for my brother Eric. I'm so glad to report that he is doing well and as happy as he's ever been. Thank you for all the prayers. Love you guys. Hey man, we are so happy to hear that. Always love hearing when people are sick or struggling or not doing well like your brother that they're able to bounce back. So very, Very happy to hear that, man. Very happy to hear that. David Lowe asks, do y'all think we add any more defensive players in the spring portal? It depends. I mean, right now, Notre Dame's still over 85 on the scholarship limit. So before they can even think about adding anyone, they need to lose some guys. Do I think it's a possibility? Yes, it's a possibility. But honestly, David, right now, I mean, the portal doesn't open until May. So it doesn't even matter to discuss it right now. Because, like, here's what I mean. I could say, man, one of the question marks that we were going to have, because we didn't get to it, Ryan, because of your internet thing, because I wanted you to be able to discuss it. But one of the things that we were going to talk about was one concern that we have on defense is the interior defensive line. There's some guys there, but I'm not as comfortable with where they are on the inside as I am on the edges.
Right.
So how the spring goes, that's a position I could see them looking at. And that's why they tried to get the kid Fisk from Western Michigan.
Yep.
And Anthony Lucas, right? So although he kind of wants to be a big end, but if guys don't step up, if there's an injury, you're going to have to go get another interior guy. If at the very least, another Chris Smith type of guy, at the very least.
Which would be fine.
Right, which would be fine. So to me, that's where I look now. But if Gabriel Rubio comes in as a great spring, if Riley's balling out, if Tyson Ford starts to kind of show his potential, if Aiden Kana busts out, all of a sudden Jason Onye starts, I like Jason. He can, okay, now you start Devin Houston as an early enrollee, like, hey, this kid can help us. Then I don't have the need there anymore, unless it's a dude, right? If another Braden Fisk wants to come, sure, you take that guy. But I may not need another Chris Smith type because I'm good there. I got Aiden Kana, I got Gabriel Rubio, I got Jason Onye, I got Devin Houston. We're good. So it just depends. I mean, safety. Right now, you may have to go to the portal. And, so we'll probably talk about this a little bit more on Thursday. But right now, without Brandon Hillman, I don't know how much he was going to play this year, but he was another athletic kid that you at least had on the roster. Right now, safety. If I'm looking at the portal right now, of what we know right now, I'm looking at the transfer portal after spring at safety. Well, the problem is, what if a problem with me kind of diving into that right now, David, is that's true as of today, but what if they move Clarence Lewis over there? What if Ben Minich just comes out this spring and is just balling? There's a lot of different things that we could look at and say, hey, if this happens, then all of a sudden you don't have a need. If Clarence Lewis moves over, Ryan Barnes moves over, one of those guys, and they step up and make plays, then you could just focus on that. So that's why I say I could tell you right now, D tackle and safety, two positions, Ryan, that I think you and I would say if we were Notre Dame, we'd have our eye on the portal right now. But It's really premature because there's opportunities for players to step up this spring and say, hey, no, you don't need that. Move this guy there, you're fine. Or this guy stepped up, you're fine. So we won't really know that until we get through the spring.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that you mentioned, a couple of the corners potentially moving to safety. Like, that could help the depth immediately, And there was a question on the yesterday's show, on the Recruiting Hour show, Brian, about, like, do you go to the portal right now? And I'm like, well, you can't go to the portal right now. And you also don't know what the spring's going to bring as far as, literally, you could
close the portal.
Exactly. And you could legitimately be one corner moving to safety away from everything being good and solidified, right? Like, Clarence Lewis can move over there and you're like, safety group's good, man. Like, we don't need that. We're good.
I think a misconception that some have is they think, well, Clarence has already played 3 years, so he's done in 2023. His first year at Notre Dame, where he played a lot as a freshman, he was that was the COVID year. So technically, even though he played a bunch that year, you got to treat that like a red shirt. So Clarence would have 2 years left to play safety. Ramon has multiple years left. Xavier has multiple years left. Clarence would have multiple years left. Justin Walters has multiple years left. Ben Minich has multiple years left. And Adon Schuler has multiple years left. So if you move Clarence, all of a sudden you feel really good about where you are. Where I get concerned is like, okay, you move Thomas Harper. I don't know if that answers that, if that solves the problem. I don't know if that is something that I would say, hey, okay, could he do it? Sure, he could do it. He doesn't play a ton of safety. He's played mostly in the box or at nickel. He's played some at safety, and you can move him there in certain looks and do that. But then you take away from your nickel spot, which to me is very important when you look at Ohio State and Clemson and USC and Duke and a lot of the teams. And Louisville's going to be a team you're going to need a nickel for this year because you're bringing in Jeff Brom now. There's a lot of teams in the schedule where we're going to need that nickel to be as good as it possibly can be. Do you really want to take away from Thomas Harper and put him on the back end? And then he's done after this year. I mean, DJ Brown. That's why I like the idea of moving a Ryan Barnes and a Clarence Lewis. One of them, I'd prefer Clarence Lewis because I know what he can do. Brian Barnes, let's say DJ Brown has a great spring and Xavier and Ramon have great springs. Then maybe it's okay. Then I'd be a little bit better off moving Ryan Barnes because then if he can give you depth and then maybe help you out down the road. But with Clarence, I feel like he can move there and right now be good. And I think that helps Clarence because if Clarence is going to play pro football, it's not going to be as a corner. It's going to be as a safety. And I'd say let him start working on it because he's not as athletic, as explosive as Julian Love was, or athletic as Julian Love was. Julian Love wasn't fast. Julian Love had really good testing numbers and all the other because he was sudden, he was fluid. He just wasn't real fast, which is why he's playing safety now and not playing corner. And Clarence to me is doesn't have even that. But he could be an NFL safety as a depth guy, potentially there. He has no shot at playing NFL at corner, in my opinion. And so that's why I would like to see him get that shot as well.
I think one key thing too, Brian, as you mentioned, is that Thomas Harper's gone after this year too, right? So if you move him to safety, that feels like a Band-Aid move to me, right? Like long-term, that doesn't help you. Like I'm trying to look in like 2-year windows, right? Like what's going to help me in 2023 and in 2024 potentially impact me. And Clarence Lewis, Ryan Barnes, one of those two would definitely long-term help you consistently, maybe more than Thomas Harper in year one. Because like you said, I mean, you also need to figure out who's the nickel then, on a full-time basis? Who's that type of guy? So that would just feel like a kind of a Band-Aid move to me and not one that really moves the needle moving forward to me. Like it will help in the immediacy, probably, sure, but it doesn't help me going into next offseason, into the 2024 season. It just feels like a Band-Aid move.
Right. Agree. All right, let's get to the next question here. Zach Martin says, spitballing here, but could you see Nolan Ziegler cross-training at safety, or has that time passed? Well, they've spent this whole offseason trying to get him, put weight on him, so I don't know if that's would be the answer. And again,
and
that
would
like
be 230 now, right?
Yeah, he's like 230 now, yeah.
Yeah.
But like moving Jaden Alsbury, those would be Band-Aids to give you numbers. It doesn't actually give you a guy there that can play that position at that level. Nolan is a level 2 guy. Jaden Alsbury is a level 2 guy. If you want to put someone at safety, now look, in 2012, could Nolan Ziegler have played safety in that defense? Yes, because he's Zeke Mata.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But in this defense, he's a Rover Will, in my opinion, maybe even a Mike if now he's 230. But if you're going to help safety, it has to come from the cornerback depth chart or the transfer portal. That's where the help has to come from.
Yeah, I don't think we don't see many 230-pound guys at safety anymore, right, Brian? Like the Sean Taylors don't come around very often. The Taylor Mayes, they don't come around at all. Exactly.
Insured by Big. This is another one of our LSU fans that joins the chat and does. We appreciate him. Says, I'm sorry if this is considered a dumb question, but as an outsider here, what is the main reason or reasons that Notre Dame wants to remain independent versus being in a conference? Just curious. Thanks. There's several reasons for it. Number one is Notre Dame is very much a school about tradition. And part of that tradition has been they're independent. They've always stayed independent. Notre Dame, long time ago, tried to get into the Big Ten, which at the time was called the Western Conference, I believe. Right, Ryan? Wasn't it called the Western Conference?
Sounds
and
correct.
They were blocked by several schools and led by Michigan. And it was basically about they didn't want a Catholic school in there. It was an anti-Catholic movement. Now, I don't know if that exists today the way it does for other things, but there used to be a lot of anti-Catholic bigotry in our country. Now, I'm not Catholic myself. I'm just saying this from a historical perspective. That's not debatable. There used to be a lot of, anti-Catholic bigotry, and the Michigan, led by, I think it was Fritz Kreisler, I think is who it was at the time, led this whole anti-Notre Dame charge. Now, Michigan State was one of the advocates for Notre Dame, which is why I've always said, hey, I'm a big fan of playing Michigan State because they did have Notre Dame's back. Notre Dame tried again in the 40s or 50s, and again Michigan blocked them. And that's kind of when Notre Dame was like, okay, screw it. We're just going to do what we're going to do. But because of Michigan initially keeping Notre Dame out of what has became the Big Ten, I think was called the Western Conference. Some of y'all in the chat may correct me if I'm wrong. I think at the time they were called the Western Conference. And so what Notre Dame said, okay, fine. We're now going to go play all over the country. And that's when Newt Rockne kind of started. That's kind of where the USC thing came from. They played Stanford in the Rose Bowl. They started doing more things where they'd go all over the country and play. And that's how Notre Dame built their brand was they were the only team really that you saw would just, I mean, they'd go out and play New York. They'd go out and play Army in the what was it called? Yankee Stadium. Goodness gracious. And they would go out and play USC. They would play all over the country. And that's how they kind of became Notre Dame's team. That's when like sort of the Subway alums were kind of born, and they just would play all over the country in an era where teams just didn't play all over the country. And so that's kind of where that came about. And then it just continued. It just grew from there. And then Notre Dame became a powerhouse that played all over the country, because it used to be independents were huge up until the 90s. I mean, we talked about this, Ryan, in 1988, when the last time Notre Dame won a national championship. I think 4 of the top 5 teams of college football that year in the final rankings were independent teams. People forget that. Number 1, Notre Dame. Number 2, Miami. Number 3, Florida State. Number 5, West Virginia. The only other team to finish in the top 5 that wasn't an independent team was Michigan at number 4. When then Notre Dame played 3 of those 4 teams. They played Miami that year. They played West Virginia that year and played Michigan that year and beat all of them. At the time, the ACC only had 8 teams. The Big 8 only had 8 teams. This is the crazy part, Ryan. Young people, you may not understand this. Back then, if a team was labeled with a number in their conference, they actually had that number of teams in their conference. Isn't that crazy to think? It's like the Big 8 actually only had 8 teams. The Big 10 had, here's great, 10 teams. The Pac-12
Brian, you can't rebrand. Can't rebrand anymore.
You're getting better. The Pac-12 of today was actually the Pac-10. And before that, they were the Pac-8 because they actually went by the number of teams in their conference. I know that's crazy to think about now because it's gotten so stupid. But that's how it was. And so Notre Dame would play. But like back then, Ryan, it was so great because you'd have Florida State would come up and play Michigan. Miami would come up and play Michigan. They'd go out and play UCLA. It was great. And when the leagues were smaller, you had to play more non-conference games. So anyway, Notre Dame just became that national team. There's a lot of financial advantages to Notre Dame being able to play all over the country, going out to New York to play, going out to California to play, going down to Florida to play, going out to Texas, in front of all the big alums. And so people talk about, well, this team makes this. Notre Dame makes plenty of money. And as we've said before, if Notre Dame needs a $400 million build onto their football facilities or on their stadium, which is the Crossroads project, they don't need to tap into their TV revenue to do that. They go raise the money. They raised every single dime and paid for it. They just built a new $100 million indoor facility for Notre Dame's football team that's now going into year 3, year 4, something like that. And every single dime, it is
beautiful. Yeah.
Every single dime was raised. Every single dime was raised from outside revenue. So and that's because they became this national brand, even though Notre Dame is a very small school. And I've used this example in the past too, Ryan, is now there's a lot of people, and I had somebody DM me on this the other day. There's a lot of people that misunderstand what the endowment is. Notre Dame's endowment is not a situation where they can say, hey, we have this endowment of X amount of dollars. And so if we need to go hire a football coach, we can pull out of that endowment and hire a football. No, that's not how it works. It doesn't go to that. But I like to use the endowment to kind of make a point. And if you look at just Notre Dame's endowment, for example, it is 16. Latest number I saw right here, I'm looking at this graph right here, is $16.7 billion. And then you look at, for example, the University of Michigan is $17.4 billion. So Notre Dame's got about $100 million less, which is, and when you're talking about big, it's a small number. But here's the thing. Notre Dame has between 8 to 12,000 students if you count graduate plus undergrads, right? Ohio State has a $6.9 billion endowment, so a third of what Notre Dame's is. Well, the University of Michigan has, 48,000 students. Ohio State has like 50,000 students, right? If you count all their campuses, I think it's about 47, 48 on their main campus. And they have like the branch here and the branch there and all that. 8,000 to 40,000 fewer students. And yet Notre Dame's right there with Michigan in an endowment and way ahead of Ohio State. Why? Because they're a national program. It's part of that's the people that graduate from Notre Dame tend to make a lot of money. It's just the reality of it. But it's also about the fact that they get so much non-alum donor money because they are the national brand. And so you lose that if you join a conference, to be honest with you. You do. And Notre Dame hasn't needed to join a conference. And so, those are the things that you'll look at, Ryan, and say, those are reasons why. Tradition, it makes sense financially. There's a lot of positives to being an independent, and there's no reason for Notre Dame to join a conference at this point in time. No one's ever been able to give me a real reason why they should join other than preconceived ideas of, well, everybody else is doing it. Well, who does Notre Dame think that they're Notre Dame has always stayed. Notre Dame's never changed. Everybody else has changed. So why should Notre Dame have to change because everybody else is changing, right? So, LSU's been in the SEC forever. South Carolina wasn't, because the last time Notre Dame won a national title, South Carolina was an independent team. Here's teams that were independent the last time Notre Dame won a championship, 1988. Miami, Florida State, West Virginia, Syracuse, Louisville, South Carolina, Pitt, Memphis, Rutgers, Penn State, Temple, Boston College, Cincinnati, Virginia Tech, Navy. Those are just some of the teams that were still independent in 1988. Right? So Notre Dame's never changed. Why should they have to change because everybody else changed? And now they all are in their feelings. Well, these teams did it. Why shouldn't you? Why should Notre Dame have to change? Why? If they want to stay independent, then let them stay independent. And if it hurts their team from winning a championship, that's their business. That's their business.
Well, so, I think the overall appeal for Notre Dame too, Brian, is that it is a unique place, right? Like it isn't like everybody else. Like, isn't that kind of what the big pull to Notre Dame football is, and to just being a Notre Dame student? Like it's different, it is a national brand. You know why? Because it's not built like any other program. It's a different type of entity. It's a different type of cat. Like, to build that brand, this is like the biggest thing, right? This is a brand building thing. It's very hard to build a brand in any type of, whatever type of entity you're working in, whether it's in media or just in general, right? Music, whatever. It's very hard to build a brand that is very similar to another person, right? Because that's not unique. It's a lot easier to build a brand when it's different. People recognize different and they gravitate towards what's different. And that's a pull for Notre Dame. And honestly, the other part of it is, from a recruiting side of things, is if Notre Dame joins a conference, you become more regionally based, in my opinion, from a recruiting perspective, right?
Penn State.
Notre Dame.
Penn State. Perfect example, Ryan.
Yep.
Penn State.
And Notre Dame needs to go down to Texas and recruit. They need to go out to California at times and recruit. They need to hit the Midwest schools. They need to hit the Northeast schools. They need to go to the Southeast. They need to go all over the place. And that allows you, because you are a national brand. No one recognizes you as a Big Ten school. They don't recognize you that, because then you would just become another Midwest power, excuse me. Yep. Notre Dame has that national relevance where you can go out to California and talk to Rico Flores, and Rico Flores knows who you are, right? Like, Notre Dame. Yeah, sure. I know them. Braylon James out in Texas. Oh, yeah, I know who Notre Dame is. Right. That's the reason why you have that reach, and that is one of the competitive advantages you need if you're Notre Dame, because we've talked about the academic side of the recruiting process, right? We've talked about the regional base as far as being a Midwest school, dealing with weather, all that type of stuff, right? But at the end of the day, Notre Dame can pull from different sides of the country to different areas, because they have that national brand and they have that ability to attract different types of people. So I think that from a recruiting perspective as well, if you become a Big Ten school, or if you're forced into a conference, that's going to hurt Notre Dame recruiting, in my opinion. It is. It's going to hurt it.
Yep. If you look at, for example, Penn State, I use Penn State because it's the closest example you have to Notre Dame. It is a school that is not in the middle of a football hotbed of recruits. And Penn State, again, won 2 national titles in the 80s, joins the Big Ten in what, 91 or so, correct? I can't. When did Penn State join the Big Ten? Do you remember when that was, Ryan?
I could look
It was
it up.
like 90,
Something like that,
90, 91, somewhere around there. They joined the Big Ten. And let me find it here. It was in 1993.
Okay.
And they went from being an independent team that could play whoever they wanted to being a Big Ten team. Now, 2 things hurt them when they joined the Big Ten. Number one, they're never going to be Ohio State, ever. Ever. They're never going to be Michigan, ever. I don't care if they win a national title. They're never going to be those teams, Ryan, ever.
Yep.
And from a perception standpoint, in any way, they're never going to be those teams. The other part about it is it forced them to play tougher schedules. Because what people don't talk enough about with Joe Paterno is Joe Paterno played soft schedules. He played like 2 good teams here, and that was it. And then when they went to the Big Ten and they had to actually play good teams, then every year they're guaranteed like 2 losses because they're going to lose 2 of the 3 big teams in your conference almost every year. One of Ohio State or Michigan is going to beat them every year, and a lot of times both will beat them. And so, like, if you look at like when Penn State won the title in 1986, they played at Alabama, who was really good that year, and they played at Notre Dame. Now, when you schedule Notre Dame, I know Notre Dame was down that year, but you expect Notre Dame to be good. And that Alabama team finished in the top 10. But the rest of the teams they played that year, Ryan, I go back and I laugh at it because I have a buddy of mine who just hates Penn State, and so he always if I want to get him going, I'll say something like, man, I tell you what, man, Joe Paterno used to schedule some heavyweights, and he'll just go off and just get super fired up. So the last time Penn State won a national title was 1986, and they played Temple, who stunk back then. Temple's head coach was actually in 1986. Here's a trivia question for you. Temple's head coach was in 1986 when Penn State beat him? Do you know the answer to this one, Ryan? Is Ryan frozen? I think Ryan's frozen again. So the answer, I thought I stumped him, but he's just frozen again. So the answer to that question is actually Bruce Arians is the answer to that question. So Bruce Arians was the head coach at Temple back in 1986. But they played Temple, who wasn't very good. They played BC, who was just kind of okay, a regional team. They played East Carolina, who stunk. They played Rutgers, who stunk. They played Cincinnati, who stunk. They played Syracuse, who was not good that year. They had some okay years under Dick McPherson, all independent teams. They played West Virginia, who wasn't very good that year. They played Maryland in the ACC, who wasn't very good. They played Pitt. They played nothing but an independent schedule. Nothing but an independent schedule. And they didn't even play the best teams in the independent league because they didn't play Miami in the regular season. They didn't play Florida State that hardly ever. I can't remember the time. And so they'd play these really soft schedules, and they'd play like 2 tough games a year. And then they'd win those tough games. And then, they'll just kind of be like, it is what it is. Like then they lost to Oklahoma, like the year that they lost to Oklahoma the year before. Same thing, played the same teams, and it was just a soft schedule. And then the previous title that Paterno won, I think it was 82. Yeah, 1982. They played Nebraska, who was good. Notre Dame was decent that year, Pitt that year. So, it's the occasional year, but more often than not, they're not playing a tough schedule. And then they go to the Big Ten, and they got to play Big Ten schedule every year. And all of a sudden, they start losing games, and they're not as good. And they become a regional conference, and they're not even the best team in that region. And so Notre Dame joins the Big Ten. Now, all of a sudden, you're having to go with heavyweights like Ohio State in that conference. You're never going to be Ohio State in that conference. Now, is Notre Dame as big of a program as Ohio State when we talk about perception and heavy? We're not talking about like what happens on the football field, just like the power of your brand. Is Notre Dame absolutely on par with Ohio State? Yes, if not a little bit beyond. Again, take football out of it because this is what Ohio State fans don't understand. Well, hold on. We've won. I'm not talking about football. I'm talking about brand power. Notre Dame is at the very least on par with Ohio State when it comes to a national standpoint. But if you join the Big Ten, you'll never be the Big Ten program that Ohio State is. And I don't care how much you win because you're an outsider. You're a regional program. And so that to me is why I just feel like it's just really just not in Notre Dame's best interest to join the Big Ten or any other conference unless they have no choice. We have a question from Archer452. He says, if you were Al Golden, how would you defend Ohio State's receivers this year? If you're running man, who gets Marvin and who gets Emeka? I mean, really what it comes down to is Notre Dame's going to keep playing field and boundary. So if Marvin's into the boundary, he'll be playing against Benjamin Morse. And if Marvin's to the field, he'll be playing against Emeka. I believe, Archer, and you would know this a little better than I would, I believe Ohio State doesn't go pure field and boundary. I don't believe, but Marvin will play a bunch into the boundary, and and when they're in like 2x2 and 3x1 type of sets. But I that's pretty much Notre Dame is a field boundary team. And again, I know it's not pure. I know I've seen him play field. I've seen him play boundary. I believe, however, that he was more so last year, more of a boundary guy. You have to correct me on that. So in those instances, he'll be going against Benjamin Morrison, and then Emeka will be going there. So look, they're going to play him how they played him this past year. They're going to be physical with him. They're going to play a lot of man coverage. And the reason you do that is not because you're looking at it and saying, hey, my guy can cover your guy. That's part of it. You feel like you have corners that can match up with him. But the other part of it is you're trying to throw off the timing of the pass game. So Ohio State is not a West Coast team from the standpoint of the same type of precision and timing that it used to be back in the day. But it's more about looking at it like this. Like it's quick game. It's the crossers, it's the meshes, it's things like that, right? So the more you can beat them up and reroute and slow down their releases, even if they eventually beat you, you are throwing off the timing of the pass game. And so if you have really good man corners, you can force Ohio State to do more volume. Now, they may still get their yards at the end of the game, but you've made them work for it. And this is what Michigan did to them 2 years ago is, Stroud threw for a ton of yards, but he had to throw a lot of passes to get there. And they forced a lot of incompletions, and they were able to make enough stops to win the game. Notre Dame did that last year, too. They were able to force C.J. Stroud to be really inaccurate. He was thrown into tight windows, which you'll often see in an early game. The timing wasn't on point. Jackson got knocked out of the game, and Notre Dame was able to kind of beat him up, and that helped them a lot in that game. And I think you'll see the same thing this year. And then the only way it works, though, to where you can win is if you slow down the releases, which means they're not getting to their spots as quickly. They're not getting into their routes as quickly. And then hopefully that allows your pass rush to get there. Now, that's what hurt Notre Dame in the third and fourth quarter last year is the pass rush wasn't getting there. And so Stroud was able to get out of the pocket and make some plays on the run and make a couple big throws down the field when Tariq Bracy got hurt and have some success on him. So I think that's how Ohio State counters is you get him out of the pocket, you take a couple shots down the field where you say, hey, my guy can beat your guy. But if you're Notre Dame, you're kind of banking on the fact that they don't throw the ball down the field a lot. So your hope is like, well, they're not going to take that shot as much. Maybe that'll change with Colin McCourt. I don't know, or Devin Smith. I don't know. I just think that's kind of who Coach Day is. Maybe if Brian Hartline has more of a say, they will throw the ball down the field more. I don't know the answer to that. We'll find that out. But I think it's be man and hope that your pass rush can get to them. And you got to blitz them to a degree, but you also don't want to blitz them a ton. Don Brown tried that, and they got destroyed. Because if you're blitzing them a ton, anytime you lose a one-on-one battle on the perimeter, you're getting smoked. And that's kind of what really killed them against Ohio State. Is they may press one guy successfully, but you lose in the slot, you lose over here, and you don't have any hope over them. Never seen a team get destroyed by mesh concepts as much as Don Brown did when he went up against Ohio State, because he just tried to blitz them like crazy, and you can't do that to this. There are some offenses you can blitz and heat up. Ohio State's not an offense you want to blitz a million times. It's just not. They'll eat you alive, in my opinion. Next question is from Nathan Milton. Does a Jordan Patel type of player make the defense better than that of Isaiah Foskey? Not saying Patel is better, just curious if his style complements the defense. I mean, look, if you're going to tell me that, we can use him more to fit our defense of what we'd like to be, and so you can evolve into this defense because of what Patel does, then sure, I'd go with that. But if you're going to look at it from the standpoint of, look, we're going to be better with Patel because he does this and Foskey didn't, then I'd say you weren't using Isaiah Foskey properly then. I think it's not that it'll make it better. It'll just be different. And if you use Jordan Patel, you say, well, man, Patel's not Foskey, and that's why he wasn't as productive. Again, that's a you problem, not a Jordan Patel problem. You got to use him correctly and be in a situation correctly and use to what he does well. So don't ask Jordan Patel to be like Isaiah Foskey, and don't ask Isaiah Foskey to be like Jordan Patel. Use him to his strength. So it could be, I mean, does it better? I don't know if I'd say that. It's just different. It's just different. All right, next question from Archer. Brian, are you bring those up now? Okay. Got one from Jason Smith. I'm not super confident DJ Brown. Kind of, for me personally, reminds me of Houston Griffith. I thought he would be the next really good safety, but just never really took off. Look, DJ Brown to me is a really good football player if you're able to use him as a role player, where you limit his snaps. You know, he's smart. You can put him in this game and let him do things he does well. It's just the more he plays, the more there's a chance he gets beat. And I think, to me, I thought the safety play in the bowl game was pretty good for the most part. And a big part of that was you were in a situation where you were not asking him and Houston Griffith to be impact players. You weren't. You were saying, hey, you're role players. We got Houston. We got, we've got Ramon playing a bunch. So this is what your role is. Go do it well. And he did that. And if you can keep him in that role, then I like what DJ Brown adds to that degree. You just don't want him to be a guy that's an every down player or anything close to an every down player. And I thought, I know Houston catches a lot of flack because he didn't pan out. I thought Houston Griffith was a solid football player for Notre Dame last year. I mean, can you name me one time he got beat last year? He didn't make a ton of plays, but he did his job. And there's a need for that. And DJ Brown is a do your job kind of guy if you can keep him in the right niche, in the right role. And that's why I think a guy like Clarence Lewis could be impactful, because I think Clarence Lewis could be basically a co-starter where you have him and playing both safety spots, or maybe Ramon plays both safety spots or whatever, and Clarence just plays one. But there's certain roles at safety I think Clarence Lewis could be really good at, and much more so than DJ Brown. And if that then allows DJ to play 10, 12, 15 snaps a game, and when he's in the game, you're having him do this thing right here, I think it'd be really good. Like Isaiah Pryor. I thought the way that Marcus Freeman used Isaiah Pryor defensively in 2021 was excellent, because he is a very limited player. He could do like two things well, and they were both involved getting downhill. And so that's all they asked him to do. They didn't ask him to do anything else. And I want to see more stuff like that this year. Our next question from Archer452. Is there a recruit in this class who doesn't hold a Notre Dame offer yet that you are high on and hope the staff will make a push for? That's a good question. I don't really have that guy now. Isaiah Canyon would have been a guy that I would have probably gone with, but he recently got offered. He's a kid that played a lot of quarterback in high school. I think he's going to be a receiver. He's 6'3", 190, pretty fast kid. He's got some tools. He's raw, plays quarterback, but he'd have been a guy that I would have put there, but he recently got offered, so I don't have that answer right now. Got a question from Brian Kelly's Accent. It's a great name. Got a scenario. Game 4 against Ohio State. It's going to be game 5, but we'll go with that. So game 5 against Ohio State. 35 seconds left on the clock. Up 24-22 on 4th and 6 on the 45-yard line. Who is your 11 on defense for Notre Dame? Because Ohio State has the ball. Well, number one, part of it is going to depend on what the personnel package is for Ohio State. In that scenario, Ohio State tends to be more 11 personnel, if not 10. I would say 11, because you want to have Cade Stover on the field. So 11 personnel, 4th and 6. Here's the two scenarios, right? So number one is you could go all coverage and go like a 3-3 look and maybe blitz a guy. You can go to a 4-2 look where you want to have your 4 down, and depend on what your pass rush is. I would probably be in a 4 down, because I would view my 4th guy being a Jordan Patelho type of guy. I don't know if I'd be in pure nickel, simply because in Ohio State, depending on your look, could pop a quick run outside. They could pop a screen. They're not afraid to do that. A quick swing pass if you're going to, because you're nickel, you tend to heat teams up more. I'd probably go my 4-2-5 with Patelho as a Viper, because I can drop him into coverage if I needed to. I'd probably have Javonte Jean-Baptiste at big end because I want my better pass rusher there. I'd have Riley Mills inside. I have to try to think of who my next inside. I'd probably have Gabriel Rubio at nose because what I want is I want long guys on the field because I want them getting a hard rush and getting your hands up, maybe batting down a pass. So I don't want Howard Cross in there in that scenario because I want a guy that's longer. I want really long guys. Baptiste long, Riley Mills long, Gabriel Rubio long. I'd have Jordan Patel rushing the quarterback. I'd probably have Jack Kaiser and J.D. Bertrand inside, or J.D. Bertrand and either Nolan Ziegler or Jalen Snead inside. I'd have Thomas Harper in the slot. I'd have my two corners would be Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart. And I would have Xavier Watts and Ramon Henderson at safety. That's where I would be. And I would have either Harper. I would probably have Xavier Watts just wherever Cade Stover goes, you follow him. I'd go cover one. I would say, hey, we're going to force the ball outside. I'm taking away slants. I'm going to jump and aggressively beat up a mesh. If they're going to beat me outside, then, hey, beat me outside. More power to you. But I also feel like the outside routes are going to be – I'm going to be aggressive in coverage. I'm not going to give you a quick outcut necessarily, but I'm going to force you to throw the ball outside. I'm not letting you beat me with a slant. I'm not letting you beat me with – a mesh. If you beat me because you throw a one-on-one to the outside and Emeka or Marvin Harrison just make a play, then hey, you know what? You're better than me right now. But that's where I'm gonna have to beat you, and then hopefully my pass rush can get there. Those are the things that I would do if I'm Notre Dame, and then just say, hey, look, you know, make sure. And the other reason I'd have four guys too is it gives me a better chance to keep my pass rush lanes than dropping 8. Because if Kyle McCord's the starting quarterback, he's athletic enough and mobile enough to where if you drop 8 and they're running some downfield stuff and you're in man, there could be a crease to run. 4 down gives me a better shot at having a little bit more pass rush lane discipline in that scenario as well. Our next question from We Are Not Marshall, Brian and Ryan. Does this upcoming season hinge on the play of the front 7? I would love a great balance across all 3 levels, but feel our offense may be bailing us out at times. Your thoughts? Absolutely. Look, this team is going to be defined by how good the front 7 is going to be. Look, I expect the offense to be really good this year. How good, we'll find out. But I expect it to be one of their best offenses in a while. The secondary is going to be very good. You've got really good corner play. I'm a lot higher on the safeties, the starting safeties, than maybe some other people are. They're not there yet. I think Xavier's going to break out. I like what Ramon can bring if he can be more consistent. And especially if they move Clarence Lewis to safety, I think the secondary could be really, really good. It really comes down to how good can your interior be. Now, your interior is going to be good enough to beat 9 teams on your schedule. No problem. And now the question is, okay, but can you beat 2 of the other 3? Now, and I'm not even talking about the 3 being Ohio State, Clemson, and USC. What I'm saying is you're going to get 9 wins based on how good this team is, in my opinion, if the offense is better. Because last year's team, if the offense was as good last year as I expect this year's offense to be, Notre Dame's 10-2 at worst, if not 11-1. And so when you look at it this year, they play some, to me, really good offenses this year. Not just the big 3 that you play. Obviously, Clemson, I expect to be better offensively. Ohio State's, look, I know a lot of Notre Dame fans think Ohio State's going to suck on offense this year. Not suck, but just not be nearly as good because they lose C.J. Stroud. And C.J. Stroud was a heck of a player. But keep in mind, they bring back 2 absolute studs at receiver. They're very deep at that position. They bring in the best freshman class of receivers in the country, arguably. Cade Stover comes back. He's not a big volume guy, but he's a clutch tight end. Travion Henderson's going to be healthy. Mayan Williams is going to be healthy. Their concern is not quarterback for me. If Ohio State's not going to be good on offense this year, it's because of the line where they lost 3 starters. That's going to be and they lost the money starters, meaning their tackles and their center. So that'd be my concern. They're not going to not be good because of their quarterback. Their quarterback can flat out play. And so the way to beat Ohio State this year is you got to win in the trenches. You've got to beat them up front. You couldn't do that last year, so they ran on you in the second half. If you can do that this year, then you've got a shot. And that's going to be the key. Notre Dame's going to have to beat them in the trenches. And that's why they beat US Clemson last year. They beat them up in the trenches on both sides of the ball. And they decided to get into an athlete game against USC and didn't play to their strengths on defense, and it got them beat, in my opinion. Beat them up in the trenches. If Notre Dame can't win in the trenches on defense, they're not going to be the team that they can be, in my opinion. So, yes, I think you nailed that question. Next one from Jason Rose. Which current coach at a lower Power 5 program is in line for a bigger challenge soon? Like, which coach is on the rise? Well, you've had some of those guys already kind of get hired recently, right? So we've had the last couple of years, we've had a lot of coaches kind of get promoted from that. I think, I think for me, let me just pull this up here real quick because I want to be able to look at these teams and kind of go through it. I think a guy that for me kind of jumps out is you kind of got to look at these programs that are doing well right now, and I'm very curious to see what James Madison can continue to do with Kurt Cignetti as their head coach. He's a guy that has been a head coach since 2011. He was an assistant coach on Alabama's first staff with Nick Saban. He was a quarterbacks coach at Temple, at Pitt for a number of years in the 90s. He was at NC State in the 2000s. He's Phillip Rivers' quarterbacks coach. He was Russell Wilson's quarterbacks coach, I believe, or at least recruited Russell Wilson anyway to NC State. He's a guy that's an older guy that you could say, hey, look, if you're someone looking for a veteran coach and you've got a shot to come in, he's a guy that I could see somebody looking at. Other teams are going to look at him as too old. I get that, and that's just the way that it is. But he's done a great job at James Madison, in my opinion. Won a national, made it to the championship in 19. They made it to the semifinal the next 2 years. They did a really nice job this year in their first year going D1. They went 8-3 this year in their first year playing D1 football. Obviously played some smaller schools, but they blew them out. Blew out Middle Tennessee, blew out Norfolk State, beat App State on the road, blew out Texas State, blew out Arkansas State, blew out Old Dominion, blew out Coastal Carolina, had a close one over Georgia State. They got beat by Georgia Southern by a touchdown, got smacked a little bit by Marshall, and lost to Louisville. But for first year playing D1 football, they did a really nice job. Really nice job. So he's a guy that I would keep an eye on. For me, some other coaches that I would say that I would kind of keep my eye on kind of going into this year is Mike Houston at East Carolina. If I'll tell you what, because Mike Houston was actually at James Madison before Cignetti. He's the guy that won the national championship. He's at East Carolina now. He took over a program that was in trouble. They went 4-8, 3-6 his first 2 years. Then 21 they went 7-5. Last year they went 8-5. I think he's done a really nice job there. Obviously, I said won a national championship at James Madison, made it to the championship game that next year. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. And the thing I like about those two guys is I think too many people are taking chances on coaches who have never proven anything before. And that's to me, that's just, hey, it's okay to hire a veteran guy. If the guy's going to win, then you're going to be fine, right? You've got a shot. So I think those are guys that I'd look at. I'm just kind of going through this list here right now of guys trying to just, because like I said, a lot of these guys have moved on. Like 2 years ago, I said Sonny Dykes when he was at SMU. He's a non-Power 5 coach. Luke Fickell's moved on. He's a guy that I would have said last year, but he's moved on. Obviously, he's now a Power 5 coach. I won't say Kalani Sataki because he's a BYU guy. I don't see him going anywhere. I think he seems to be pretty happy where he is. I hope he doesn't go anywhere anyway. A couple other guys that I would take a look at. Let me just kind of go through here. I'm not going to throw Gus Malzahn on that list. Hugh Freeze has already moved on. Sean Clark hasn't really blown me away. I think Jamie Chadwell's a tad over. Here's one. Jeff Traylor at Texas San Antonio, UTSA. That guy's done a heck of a job there. Now, he has gotten some sniffs already from some big-time programs, but or not some big-time Power 5 programs. He's turned them down or not got there. But I think for the right job, he could come. He's been an assistant at Arkansas for 2 years in the past. He coached special teams at Texas for 2 years. He was a long-time high school football coach. And he's done a really nice job at Texas San Antonio. Really nice job. They've gone 23-5 the last 2 years. He's a guy that I could see being someone that has a shot to kind of jump up and get that kind of a Big 12 job or something like that here coming up in future years. So Willie Fritz is a guy that obviously got a lot of interest this year. We'll see kind of where he goes if he wants to go. He actually seems to be – some guys like coaching at that level, to be completely honest with you. And I get it. But those are guys that I would look at for me. Those are guys that I look at. Timeout Tom says, I'm looking forward to a better pass rush in 23, not because of the D-line personnel, but the ability of coverage with Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison not to allowing the ball to be released quickly. Brian and Ryan, do you agree? Yeah. And part of that is a system. And so, if you look at, I had the numbers here. Let me pull them up. I haven't had a chance to put them into an article. The last 5 games that actually I did put it into an article. I put it into the article I wrote today. But the last 5 games where Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison played together. So it's the 5 games before USC because Cam Hart got hurt against BC. Notre Dame's pass defense only allowed 5.5 yards per attempt. It allowed opponents to only have 158.8 yards passing per game. They allowed teams to only complete 52.1% of their passes, and they had a quarterback rating of 98.75. So, for context, that 5.5 yards per attempt in the last 5 games would have ranked them 3rd nationally in passing yards allowed per attempt. Their passer rating of 98.75 would rank 2nd nationally in pass defense, and their 52.1% completion rate would have tied for 4th nationally last year. Now, again, that's over a 5-game stretch. It's not an entire season, but I'm trying to put into context how good that was, and a big part of it was because of the play of the corners. They could just lock you down, then the pass rush, and it's not a surprise that as it started being more effective playing man and taking away the quick game, all of a sudden Isaiah Foskey starts getting more sacks, other guys start getting more sacks. So you are correct that is a big part of it. However, you could be a great man team and still get ripped up in the pass game if you can't get to the quarterback. So it's a little bit of both. But I do think having corners that can kind of play that way allows you to add another second onto the quarterback holding the ball, which could be the difference between the ball coming out quickly or you getting a sack or getting a hit or batting a ball. So I certainly think that plays a role in it. No question. No question. Good comment, Tom. Katie Keever says, do you expect practice format to change from last year in Freeman's second year and also with the departure of Reese? I don't think the format will change a ton, Katie. I think the format will stay mostly the same. I think what'll change, there'll be some minor tweaks. You always tweak practice. I still think those keep with competition. Certain things will change. I think the demeanor will change a little bit, and that's not good or bad. It's just when you have a different personality running a side of the ball and they have a different personality on offense this year, it's just going to be different. Tommy Reese did things his way. Jared Parker's going to do things his way from a demeanor and attitude and engagement standpoint. Again, I'm not saying one's better or worse. I'm just saying it's different. That's going to change, but I don't think the overall practice structure will change a ton, Katie. And that's a prediction. I mean, you don't see that. You don't often see that from year to year. I am curious to see what the wrinkles are that we do see. And then we have one final question here that we'll pull up before we move on. And it says, Robert Bishop says, so Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning? Supposedly there will be an even competition. Thoughts? Well, I mean, I don't – here's the thing, Robert. I'm not as down on Quinn Ewers as other people are. Here's what's happened to Quinn Ewers, okay? And Ryan, I'm very curious if you agree with this. And if you want to jump in and comment on this, you can. Otherwise, you can just text me what you want to say. I think that Quinn Ewers has gone from vastly overrated coming out of high school to very much kind of underrated now. And what I mean by that is I don't think Quinn Ewers was that good last year. But what people got to remember is that was supposed to be his freshman year of college. He enrolled early at Ohio State to get an NIL deal. Now, that's on him. But he came out as a freshman and on a team that had a great running game, and he did okay. I mean, he wasn't great, but he completed 58% of his passes, 15 touchdowns, 6 picks, 7.4 yards per attempt. I mean, he had some okay moments. You know, he had end of the year great, you know, statistically. Went 31 of 47, 369 yards and a touchdown against Washington. And if he doesn't have Jarrell Worthy, goodness gracious, Xavier Worthy dropping a couple balls, he's over 400 yards and at least got one more touchdown. He didn't play 3 games, so those numbers are low. You know, he's got to protect the ball, but he only had really one bad game, return the ball over a ton. And I thought he did some nice things against Kansas State. I don't think he was helped a lot by the O-line of the receivers last year. They dropped a lot of passes for him, I felt. But the reality is I think the expectations were too high for me. I think that's really the big thing with Quinn Ewers is I'm not sitting here defending Quinn Ewers like he's some great quarterback and people just need to give him time and he's going to be everything that people thought he was coming out of high school. He's never going to live up to what they thought he was coming out of high school. I mean, if he has the same career that Trevor Lawrence had, people are going to say, well, he never won a Heisman and he only won 1 title, so he's not that good. That's how much hype that they gave this poor kid. And so I look at, I'm sorry, I just don't think that he was as bad as people made him out to be when you consider the fact he was basically a freshman. And he chose, it's his choice. He chose to spend his senior year of high school sitting the bench at Ohio State instead of playing high school football. That's on him. He made that decision for money. But the reality is I think that we've kind of gotten to the point where I don't think I think he gets kind of crapped on a little bit more than he should because of the hype placed on him. But the hype placed on him, that's not his fault. He didn't say, "Hey, I want everybody to hype me up, call me the greatest quarterback ever, give me the highest recruiting grade you've ever given a quarterback, and thank you. That's what I want." I don't think he wanted that. Now, he took advantage of it with some NIL deals, but I just feel like he was an overrated kid coming out, that they're expecting him to play to this level. I actually thought he did okay for what I expected. He played better than I thought he was going to play last year, not by much. That's part of it. He's going to have a year advantage on Arch. Here's the other part of it. I don't think Arch Manning is as good as people make him out to be. Now, is Arch Manning a top 50 to 100 quarterback? Absolutely. But people have made comments like there's a particular guy who's a national name in recruiting who I don't have a lot of respect for, so I won't say his name. But he said something really stupid. He said if Arch Manning last name was not Manning, he'd be a 3-star recruit. I think that's stupid. That's absolutely stupid comment to make. Arch Manning is a top 100 football player, and easily, I don't care what his last name is or who his dad is or who his uncles are or who his grandpas are. If his name was Arch Driscoll and he was my cousin and didn't have anybody famous in him, I'd say he's a top 100 player. I might be Ryan would still rank him as a top 100 player. I'd be biased because he'd be my cousin. But you get the point that I'm making. He's a good football player. He's just not a top number 1, top 5 player in the country for me. So I don't think Arch comes in with the kind of ability to say, hey, he's just going to come in and beat a guy out. If Quinn Ewers handles the quarterback battle well, just focuses on him, keeps developing himself, and works hard, he'll be the starter. If Quinn Ewers gets beat out, it's because he has a bad attitude and doesn't put in the work. That's what I think. So I think Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning were both very overrated coming out of high school. I think Quinn Ewers had too much asked of him and actually did okay last year for a first-year guy. Didn't get a ton of help at receiver. They're going to have a much better receiving core this year, in my opinion. And so I think he'll be the guy. I do. Am I betting my mortgage on it? No, because I don't trust him. That's my big knock on him. I don't have a lot of I have issues with him as personality. But I think he's a quality quarterback and has a chance to be a good college quarterback, pretty good college quarterback in time if given that time and if he's willing to put in the work. So that's my thing. And again, if Arch Manning was Arch Smith and he was the number 45 player in the country, I don't know if we'd be having the same conversation about is he going to beat him out. I don't think he would. I think Quinn Ewers is a good football player. They got too much hype put on him that if he gets his head on straight and matures a little bit, he's going to be a good football player. And he showed me some toughness last year too. I'll say that. He got beat up by Alabama and he kept fighting until they knocked him out of the game. But I mean, he literally had an injury come play. But I think it's going to be Quinn Ewers. So that's going to be it for today's show, everybody. I want to thank everybody for being with us today. Thanks for your patience with Ryan's technical problems. We'll get that figured out. It's just there's I think storms over there in Jersey today, I believe. I know we've had a lot of snow today. Sounds like there's been a lot of cold all over the place. So everybody stay safe. Want to thank you all so much for being with us again. Hit that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. And I would ask y'all, if you haven't already done so and you want to support Irish Breakdown, sign up for the message board. If you're someone who says, hey, but I don't go on a message board, that's okay. You're still helping support us financially, whether you get a monthly membership and an annual membership, or if you just want to join one of the booster clubs, the Shamrock, Blue, or Gold clubs, we would appreciate that as well. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Don't forget tonight, I believe at 6 o'clock, we will have IB Nation Sports Talk with Sean and Vince. So you'll want to check that out as well. And of course, make sure you're subscribed. If you listen via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.